Welcome back to the Dreamland Encounters. Today we have a special story for this little community. I share real-life encounters with beings from beyond the skies to help you unwind and drift off to sleep. Before we dive in, I would love to hear from you. Leave a comment and let me know where you're tuning in from. I rode the late train from Chicago to Milwaukee countless times, a familiar route from my downtown job to the suburbs. Most nights, it was nearly empty, just a few tired workers or shift employees scattered about. This particular evening was different. Fog blanketed the city, making street lights bleed into the misty air. As we passed through the industrial area, something unusual caught my attention. In an empty, fenced-off lot, a precise arrangement of lights blinked steadily. These weren't random street lamps or security lights. They formed a perfect diamond shape, sharp-edged and glowing softly against the foggy backdrop. I couldn't understand their source. There were no buildings, no visible power lines. The rhythmic pulsing was mesmerizing and strange. At the next stop, a small suburban station with just a few passengers, a man entered and sat directly across from me. He stood out immediately. Dressed in an immaculate black suit, with a crisp white shirt and black tie, he looked like a funeral director or government agent. His appearance was unnaturally perfect. Dark hair slicked back, skin pale and smooth, face sharply defined. He sat silently for a moment, then pulled a completely blank notebook from his jacket. Without a word, he slid it across the seat toward me. I blinked, confused by this unexpected gesture. His intense gaze never wavered as I tried to understand what was happening. The mysterious lights in the vacant lot still flickered in my mind, their precise pattern burning into my memory. Something about this entire scene felt surreal, disconnected from the ordinary train ride I was used to. I looked at him like he was joking, but his eyes stayed locked on mine. His voice was low, almost a whisper. "Sketch, what?" He didn't answer right away. The train rattled on and fog thickened outside the window. When I glanced back, the lights on the lot had vanished. I picked up the notebook, feeling the smooth paper. "Look, I don't draw. I'm not sure what you want me to sketch." He smiled slightly, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Not what you think, just the lights, the pattern." The train grew quieter. Other passengers kept to themselves, earbuds in or heads down. I opened the notebook and drew a rough diamond shape with a pen from my bag. It wasn't perfect, more like a kid's doodle, but the edges lined up. He watched without blinking. When I finished, he slid the notebook back. "Better," he said, "but not quite right." I frowned. "How do you want it then?" He didn't respond. Instead, he stood up as the train slowed near the next station. "Remember?" he said softly. "Sketch it differently." Then he was gone, disappeared into the crowd before the train stopped. I looked down at the blank notebook, confused. For the rest of the ride, I kept glancing toward that vacant lot, but the lights never returned. Stations got emptier, fog never lifted. Days passed. I tried sketching again and again, different shapes and angles, but nothing matched what I saw. Every time I looked up, I felt watched, even when alone. Black cars started appearing outside my apartment. No license plates, tinted windows. Drivers never moved, just sat waiting. One midnight, I opened the notebook. The pages were blank except for my drawings. But I swear there was a faint glow from the paper. Not light exactly, but something strange, pulsing with the memory of those lights. I worked as a night security guard at the old Silver Pines amusement park just outside a small town in upstate New York. The place had been closed for a couple of years, but the owners kept it fenced off and paid for overnight security to keep vandals and trespassers out. I wasn't expecting much. Mostly just long shifts of silence, the occasional stray raccoon, and maybe the distant hum of the traffic on the highway. It was late August when things started feeling off. That night, I was making my usual rounds on foot, walking along the perimeter fence and checking the gates. The sky was clear and cool. Just the kind of night where you can see stars shining bright between the tall pines. The Ferris wheel stood still and dark against the horizon, its silhouette a familiar shape that almost looked peaceful in the moonlight. I was near the Ferris wheel when something caught my eye. At first, I thought it was a drone or some kind of promotional light show the owners might have tested, but there was no sound and the lights weren't moving like drones usually do. Above the Ferris wheel, just barely visible, was a circular shape, a craft of some sort. It wasn't blinking or flashing like a plane, and it wasn't moving fast. It hovered silently like it was watching the park. I froze, staring up at it. The craft was perfectly round. No wings, no lights that changed or moved, just a steady glow around its edge that blended with the night sky. It wasn't huge, maybe the size of a small car, but the way it held position was unnatural. I couldn't hear anything unusual, no hum or buzz, just the quiet night. I blinked and it was gone. No flash, no noise, just gone. I checked my phone. No signal out there and there wasn't a soul around. The whole park was silent except for my own footsteps on the cracked pavement. The man wanted me to sketch it differently. I don't know what that diamond of lights really was or what it meant. All I know is that after that night, nothing about those rides felt normal anymore. Sometimes I wonder if I should show the notebook to someone, maybe a friend or the police. But the thought of explaining all this sounds ridiculous. So I just keep the notebook hidden, sketching in it when I can, always trying to get the shape right, but never quite succeeding. And every time I do, the feeling of being watched gets stronger. I guess some things don't want to be understood. The abandoned amusement park had always felt a bit eerie during my night shifts, but nothing prepared me for what I would experience. It started with a strange craft near the Ferris wheel one night, or maybe my eyes were playing tricks in the darkness. The rest of that shift passed normally, though I kept looking up, half expecting to see it again, but it never returned. The next evening changed everything. I arrived early, crossing the empty parking lot, when two men walked through the entrance. They were identical in appearance: black suits, white shirts, black ties, and shiny black shoes. Their hair was neatly combed back, expression serious yet calm. They didn't look like typical park visitors, but they weren't threatening either. I greeted them as I would any guest, but they didn't respond. Instead, they gave a single, deliberate nod and continued walking toward the park's center. Curiosity got the better of me, and I followed at a distance. Their destination was clear: the old Midnight Manor, a haunted house attraction that had been closed for years. The building was a wreck, half collapsed, boarded up with broken windows and peeling paint. Then something strange happened. They disappeared inside, and when I looked back a minute later, they were gone. No footprints, no open doors, nothing. I spent the next hour searching every accessible area of the park, calling out. The haunted house remained locked tight, with no way in without heavy tools. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe there were maintenance workers I didn't know about. But deep down, I knew something was off. After that night, the park began to change in subtle, unsettling ways. The Ferris wheel seemed to move gently in the breeze, but when I approached, its gears were motion bog-red less. Shadows started behaving oddly, moving too quickly or in ways that didn't match their sources. Phantom footsteps echoed on empty walkways. My radio would crackle with static before cutting out completely. Once, my flashlight flickered and died for a full minute, despite having fresh batteries. Days later, I saw them again. The same two men, standing near the entrance, perfectly still, watching me. My heart raced. They didn't move or acknowledge my presence. When I blinked, they vanished. No sound, no movement, just gone. The silence grew heavier with each shift I worked at the abandoned amusement park. Something was different, not just the usual decay and darkness, but a presence that watched and waited. I needed the job, so I stayed despite the growing tension. During one night's routine check, I discovered strange circular marks near the Ferris wheel base. They weren't from vehicles or animals, but looked like something heavy and oddly shaped had pressed into the ground. I took photos but told no one. Another evening, a flickering light caught my eye inside the haunted house. The place should have been empty, but there it was, like an old lantern's glow. I called out, but only silence responded. Nights became increasingly strange. Whispers or wind seemed to carry a rhythmic pattern from the surrounding woods, almost like an attempted communication. About a week later, the mysterious men reappeared near the Ferris wheel. One looked directly at me and muttered something I barely heard. "This place doesn't belong to you." Before I could react, they vanished into the bordering trees. The night felt thick, cold, and oppressive. Something was watching me. I finished my shift and went home. The next day, I quit. I haven't returned since. Questions haunt me. What were those men doing? What was happening around that Ferris wheel? I have no answers, just a sense that I witnessed something larger, a warning I was never meant to understand. Sometimes when I drive past the area, I catch glimpses of movement, faint lights drifting between trees, or the Ferris wheel turning ghostly in moonlight. But when I look again, there's only darkness. I'm a wildlife photographer, working freelance from a cabin deep in northern Minnesota's woods. That night by the river, just before dusk, I was hoping to capture herons and kingfishers, a typical late summer evening. Little did I know how untypical it would become. The river bend was wide and slow-moving, a prime spot for wildlife. That evening, the sky hung in faded orange-gray light, tricky but rewarding for patient photographers. I sat on a fallen log near the water's edge, my camera mounted on a tripod aimed at where trees cast long shadows. For about an hour, I'd been capturing scenes, birds landing on branches, a beaver swimming past. Later, while unloading photos at home, something unusual caught my eye. Certain shots revealed strange shapes beneath the river's surface, dark, irregular forms that didn't reflect sky or trees. They were smooth and matte, almost like solid shadows, remaining unchanged between frames despite water movement. Initially, I dismissed them as a camera glitch or light trick and deleted the images. But curiosity drew me back the next day. I returned to the same location, same time, same lighting. The shapes reappeared. Zooming in and shifting angles, I confirmed their persistent presence just below the water's surface. When I mentioned this to a friend, they joked about river spirits. Something felt off, though. These weren't supernatural fantasies, but genuine anomalies. 2 nights later, I was editing photos on my laptop's porch. The woods were silent, except for cricket chirps and the river's soft rush. My remote cabin rarely saw visitors, so I was surprised when gravel crunched under approaching tires. A man in a black suit, crisp white shirt, polished shoes, emerged from an unfamiliar vehicle. No tie, slightly out of place in the wilderness. Instead of knocking, he walked directly to my porch. "Can I help you?" I asked, attempting to sound calm. His smile held no warmth. "I'm interested in some photos you've taken," he said, producing a small notebook. Without showing its contents, he continued, "I believe you have images capturing certain river anomalies. I'd like to review your camera's memory card." Suddenly uncomfortable, I stepped back. The river held something strange. When I first noticed the odd shapes beneath the surface, I wasn't sure what to make of them. I'd been staying at a remote cabin, spending quiet days photographing the landscape, when a mysterious stranger appeared on my porch. He took my camera's SD card without asking, handling it carefully while delivering a cryptic warning. Water keeps its own secrets. Sometimes those secrets aren't meant to be uncovered. His presence felt unsettling, and when he returned the card moments later, he simply drove away. Later, I returned to the river to investigate what I'd seen. The water looked completely normal, clear and slow-moving. But when I looked through my camera's viewfinder, those same strange shapes were there again. I captured several photographs and examined them closely on my laptop that night. The images revealed dark, solid shapes without reflection or texture, positioned just beneath the water's surface. After that, odd occurrences became more frequent. At night, I'd catch fleeting movements between the trees, always too quick to identify. My phone would inexplicably die when I tried to use it, and the river would emit a low, vibrating hum near the area I'd been photographing. I mentioned these experiences to a few Mona friends, who dismissed them as stress-induced imagination, but I knew something had fundamentally changed. The stranger's warning echoed in my mind. Water keeps its own secrets. Now, I avoid the river after dark. The photographs remain, those inexplicable shapes always lurking just below the surface. A silent reminder of something I cannot explain. The river whispers secrets, and the trees stand like silent guardians. Shadows dance when the wind goes still, and something watches from the darkness. A man in black once warned me about leaving certain things undisturbed. I'm Rachel, a storm photographer who spent years chasing wild skies and capturing nature's raw moments. My work isn't glamorous. It's cold nights, freezing fingers, and endless patience. But sometimes you catch something extraordinary. That day was different. Just outside Amarillo, Texas, the sky was electric with thunderheads and lightning. I was setting up near a dirt road off Highway 287, my camera gear packed tight in the truck bed. Through my long telephoto lens, I noticed something strange in a cumulonimbus cloud, weird ripples along its edges, like water in motion. Then it happened. A small, metallic shape darted through the storm cells. Not a plane, not a bird. Just a sleek, shiny object moving effortlessly through the clouds. No trail, no sound. I snapped photos frantically, adjusting focus and shutter speed. The object vanished almost instantly. Back in my basement dark room with just a red bulb and developing trays, I carefully processed the film. The negatives revealed something incredible. A dark disk catching the last sunlight, sharp and clear. Something that didn't belong. I'm writing this because I want someone to know. There are quiet places with hidden stories, secrets that might be alive and watching. Something is out there, moving through the storm, waiting to be discovered, and I was developing some photographs in the dark room, careful not to damage the film. The red light cast an eerie glow as images slowly emerged: storm clouds, lightning, a rugged landscape, and then, cutting through the frames, that strange metallic blur appeared again. Something unlike anything I'd ever seen before. The house was silent, except for the steady drip of the kitchen faucet upstairs. Suddenly, the basement door creaked open. No footsteps, no warning. I spun around to find a man standing there, sharp features, pale face, dressed in a black suit without a tie. He stood bathed in the red light, looking calm yet serious, as if he didn't quite belong. His eyes caught the light, and I could see the faint reflection of the negatives in his pupils. "Can negatives lie?" he asked, his voice low and steady. Caught off guard, I could only respond with a confused "what?" He stepped closer, hands folded, moving with deliberate calm. "Can a negative show something that isn't really there? Something that might never have been?" I shook my head, unsure how to answer. His gaze swept the room, settling on the contact sheets pinned to the wall. "You've captured something," he said. "Something people aren't meant to see." My stomach tightened. "Who are you?" He smiled, a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Just someone who makes sure certain images don't spread," he replied, his tone polite but carrying an undeniable edge of authority. I felt trapped, but I was determined not to let him take the film. "Why are you here? What do you want from me?" He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small card, no logo, just black text on white. In the dim light, I couldn't make out the details. "We keep things quiet," he said. "You won't be bothered if you agree to destroy those negatives." My heart raced. I wanted to refuse, to demand answers, but his calm certainty gave me pause. My phone buzzed upstairs, a message from Mike about breakfast plans. The man noticed my distraction. "Think it over," he said, then turned and walked out, the basement door closing softly behind him. I remained in the dark room, staring at the negatives. The images were real. I had proof. But now, everything felt different. I live outside Amarillo, Texas, where wind farms spread out for miles like giant, slow-moving flowers. My name's Cole, and I'd been into drone racing for a couple years, not professionally, just local meets and online streams mostly. But I had a decent setup and a group of friends I raced with regularly. The track was our usual spot. A cleared field near the biggest wind farm around. Turbines towered above us, spinning lazily as we set up. It was early May, dry but not blistering yet, with wind picking up just enough to challenge the drones without knocking them out of the sky. Perfect conditions for racing. I was testing a new camera on my Sparrow Mk2 Racer, hoping to capture smooth lines through the course and maybe get some cool shots of the blades overhead. Around 7 p.m., just before dusk settled in, I launched the drone. The light was fading, but still bright enough to see the orange and red tips of the turbines. Strange things started happening after that night. My camera gear would be slightly moved when I was certain I'd left it alone. Phone calls would drop or fill with static in certain parts of the house. Late at night, soft footsteps outside the windows would catch my attention, but when I looked, nothing was there. I considered going to the police or telling someone, but who would believe me? A mysterious man in black showing up and telling me to erase evidence. It sounded crazy. Then one night I noticed the negatives had changed. The metallic object I'd captured was completely gone, not faded or scratched, just missing from tear frames. I checked the original digital files from my camera's backup, and the images were identical. It was like the object had never been captured at all. I still have the developed photos without the object and the card the man left. They're stored in a box under my bed, along with my camera. Sometimes, when the wind is right and storm clouds gather, I wonder if I should try chasing storms again. But something about that night and the man's question keeps me from pulling out the long lens. Maybe negatives can lie, or maybe some things are better left unseen. I pushed the throttle up, weaving through the carefully placed gates. The run involved low passes and tight turns, followed by a long stretch along the farm's edge. About halfway through, something caught my eye on the drone's feed. Just past the final gate, near the tallest turbine, a faint, twisting shape appeared. At first, I dismissed it as a lens flare or light trick, but the shape slowly spiraled upward, resembling a smoke ring or a sluggish vortex twisting near the turbine blades. It wasn't massive, maybe a few feet across, but unmistakably present. As I tried to track it with the drone, the signal began to glitch. The image froze momentarily, and then the shape vanished completely as if it had never existed. The drone remained fully operational with no loss of control or unexpected movements. I landed and carefully reviewed the footage, rewinding to confirm I hadn't imagined it. The spiral was clearly visible in the raw video. Marcus, my tech-savvy buddy, was equally puzzled when I showed him. Nobody in our group had ever witnessed anything similar near the turbines. The mysterious spiral lingered in my thoughts. I returned to the track several times, but it never reappeared. Everything remained routine, just standard races, wind, and static-filled radio chatter. Then, about 3 weeks after the initial sighting, something unusual happened during a late afternoon practice. The field stood empty except for a man near the pit area. His black suit and polished shoes seemed out of place in the dusty, casual environment. Low sunlight made his sunglasses gleam like mirrors. He introduced himself as Mr. Landry, speaking with an eerily calm, almost rehearsed tone that demanded attention. He complimented my drone skills, mentioning he'd watched some races online. When I inquired about his origins or how he found me, he simply smiled and said, "Let's just say I'm interested in the finer points of competition." Our conversation lasted around 10 minutes, primarily discussing drones, piloting techniques, and the wind farm. I sensed he knew more about the spiral incident than he revealed. Just before departing, he produced a USB drive and handed it to me. "This contains a copy of your last race recordings," he stated, adding cryptically, "except the last." I was working a freelance gig in the Pacific Northwest, chasing weather stories and local events for an online magazine. Mid-October brought shorter, colder days with thick, low clouds often blanketing the sky. One evening, I drove out to the coast near Etorio, Oregon, hoping to capture some moody shots of fog rolling in from the ocean. I parked at a small pullout near the shore. The wind was brisk, cutting through my jacket and chilling my skin. Just after sunset, the horizon still held a dull orange glow. With my camera out, I was adjusting the lens, trying to capture the shifting fog on the water's rippling surface. That's when I noticed a cluster of lights moving just below the clouds. Initially, I thought they were fishing boats, but something felt off. The lights were too uniform, too steady, moving together like a single shape, slow and deliberate. Later, a man approached me. "Some courses shouldn't be won," he said, nodding slowly before walking to his black sedan with tinted windows and driving away without looking back. I was confused by his cryptic message. At home, I plugged in the USB and discovered something strange. The files were identical to my original streams, except the last hour of footage was missing. The timestamp showed continuous recording, but a chunk was clearly cut out. Checking my original files confirmed the hour was still there. I reached out to local groups, asking if anyone had noticed anything unusual at the track or seen a suited guy hanging around. No one had. Marcus suggested it might be some corporate or government surveillance of the wind farms, but there was no concrete proof. After that, I changed my routine. I continued racing on weekends, but only in daylight and away from the turbines. The spiral never returned. The man in black never came back. It was subtle, almost like a warning. I'm still unsure what "some courses shouldn't be won" means exactly, but it felt like more than a threat. I'd stumbled upon something meant to stay hidden, and they ensured I got the message. That's what haunts me, not the shape, not the missing footage, but those words. I was photographing the coastline when something caught my eye through the fog. A perfect triangle of 3 amber lights, each as large as a street lamp, hung motionless in the sky. They were positioned with an almost mathematical precision, not flickering or changing brightness. The formation glided silently beneath the cloud cover. I kept my camera trained on the lights, snapping pictures as quickly as I could, but the fog thickened, and within 5 minutes the lights vanished completely. I waited, hoping they might reappear. But nothing happened. Back in my hotel room, I examined the photos closely. The triangle was starkly visible against the cloudy background, looking, almost unreal. I shared the images with friends who were interested in unexplained phenomena, expecting some skepticism. Days later, something bizarre happened. Walking through downtown Portland on a cloudy afternoon, I passed a bookstore corner and noticed a man in a crisp black suit. He looked like he'd stepped straight out of a 1950s corporate advertisement. Middle-aged, clean-cut, with slicked-back hair. When our eyes met, he nodded. Without speaking, he unrolled a large print right on the sidewalk. It was my photograph, blown up to nearly 2 feet wide, showing the triangular lights. Stunned, I asked how he'd gotten the image. His response was chilling and cryptic. He saw the wrong part of the sky. Before I could question him further, he rolled up the print and vanished into the crowd. I stood there bewildered. When I tried to call a friend, my phone showed a nearly dead battery, despite being fully charged that morning, and a weak signal. even in the middle of the city. That night, I meticulously reviewed my photos. The triangle was the only unusual element. No planes, drones, or flares. Just 3 steady, unchanging lights. In the following days, something felt off. Shadows seemed to move just beyond street lamps. I'd hear quiet footsteps behind me when I was alone, always just at the edge of perception. I'm Tom Keller. I'm 37, and I've been a rail fan for as long as I can remember, the kind of person who loves trains, old tracks, signals, all of it. My small town in upstate New York sits near some industrial lines that haven't seen a train in years. These tracks are slowly being consumed by rust and wild vegetation, weeds pushing through the wooden ties. One early fall morning before dawn, I went out to explore a specific abandoned track running through woods near an old quarry. I'd heard whispers about strange lights in that area. Locals had been talking, sharing stories that lingered just at the edge of believability. Something felt off from the start. Cars parked oddly nearby, their windows tinted dark. At a gas station, a man in a black suit stood silently at the pump next to me, staring straight ahead. When I looked again, he had vanished, but the pump continued running. I didn't tell anyone about these moments. They seemed too strange, too unreal. Later, at a nearly empty diner near my apartment, the atmosphere felt heavy. Lights flickered, the heater rattled, cold drizzle fell outside, the kind that seeps into your bones. Through the window, I spotted a figure under a street lamp across the street. Another man dressed in black, motionless. Then he simply turned and walked into the mist. Walking home, I felt watched. The city sounds seemed amplified. Streets were almost deserted. When I checked my phone, a triangle photo I'd taken had disappeared, replaced by a blank grey sky image. I knew I hadn't deleted it, but couldn't explain its absence. A news report the next day mentioned unexplained lights off the coast near Atoria, around the same time as my experience. Just local chatter about strange atmospheric phenomena. I haven't returned to that coastal area since. The photo is gone, the lights have vanished. But sometimes, on foggy evenings, I catch a glimpse of 3 faint points of light, moving silently beyond the clouds, perfectly aligned. And I still wonder about that man on the sidewalk who seemed to know something about my photo, telling me I was looking in the wrong place. I usually don't share these experiences, but lately, they've been weighing on my mind. The tracks were quiet that morning, just me and my camera, waiting for the day to begin. Dark sky slowly giving way to a soft blue-grey light. I'd come for some peaceful photography, drawn by the early stillness. My boots crunched on the gravel, breaking the silence as I walked down the railway line. Something caught my eye about 100 yards ahead. Something that didn't belong. Not a train car, not a truck. A craft unlike anything I'd ever seen before, roughly the size of a large car. It sat directly on the tracks. Its surface was impossibly smooth, like brushed metal but more refined. No rivets, no seams. A matte grey that almost melted into the misty morning. I froze. Something felt off, though I'm not easily unnerved. Carefully, I raised my camera and started taking pictures, trying to capture details through the fog. The shape was angular, designed for sliding or hovering, not rolling. No wings, no obvious doors, just sitting there, completely still. A distant engine sound broke my concentration. I glanced back, expecting maybe a maintenance crew. Instead, a black sedan appeared at the tree line. The driver's window rolled down, and a man stepped out. Tall, late 40s, dark hair slicked back, wearing an expensive charcoal suit without a tie. His face was a blank slate, someone who'd mastered hiding emotion. He approached me directly. "Tracks lead to places you don't belong," he said. No introduction, no small talk. When I asked what he meant, he simply looked at the craft and told me it wasn't for casual visitors. His tone was serious, brooking no argument. I was just taking pictures, I tried to explain, but something in his demeanor made it clear this wasn't a normal encounter. The strange craft remained silent and mysterious, as the man's presence seemed to fill the space between us with unspoken warnings. I was checking trail cameras in Dead Horse Canyon near the northern range where the forest gives way to dry, brushy terrain when something unusual happened. At first, everything seemed normal. Just another routine morning tracking wildlife movements. But then I spotted something that didn't belong. The encounter left me unsettled. A man in a suit appeared briefly, nodding silently before returning to his sedan, which idled quietly before driving off without another word. As he left, the craft I'd seen began to fade, thickening mist obscuring it until nothing remained except empty rails and morning dew. Over the next few days, I kept returning to the spot, finding no trace of what I'd witnessed. When I shared the story with friends, they mostly laughed, suggesting it was probably a military operation. But nothing about the incident felt military to me. No helicopters, no patrol cars, no warning signs. Strange occurrences started happening afterward. During walks near the tracks, I'd hear footsteps behind me but find no one when I turned. Shadows would slip between trees, always just beyond clear view. My phone began experiencing odd glitches. Calls dropping unexpectedly, pictures taken near the site coming out blurred with inexplicable light streaks. One evening, driving home late, headlights followed me persistently. A black sedan matched my speed for miles, stopping when I stopped, never passing. When I pulled into my driveway, the car vanished. Phone calls became increasingly bizarre, silence, then slow, steady breathing, followed by a faint click. I haven't answered those calls since. Sometimes the whole experience feels like a bad dream, yet the photos remain on my camera. Something always holds me back from returning to those tracks. The man's words echo in my mind, maybe there are places you're not meant to go. And on quiet nights when fog rolls in thick, I could swear I hear a faint hum sliding over metal tracks that no longer exist. The morning was hot and dry, late July, with no wind or clouds, just the buzz of insects and gravel crunching under my boots. I was out checking trail cameras for our wildlife monitoring group, tracking cougar and bobcat movements through motion-activated cameras we'd mounted along old service roads and game trails. By 6:30 a.m., I parked off Forest Road 19 and started hiking up to the ridge. The cameras were spaced about a mile apart, carefully positioned in tree notches or zip-tied to posts. The first two checks were routine. A few deer, one coyote, and a fox captured on film. The third camera needed a battery replacement, which I quickly handled. The final camera overlooked a narrow draw where we'd discovered mountain lion prints last spring, nestled between two tall ponderosa pines, angled down a slope toward a low clearing. When I reviewed the SD card on my tablet, something unusual caught my eye from 2 nights prior. Around 2:17 a.m., the infrared footage showed typical nighttime graininess with swaying branches. Then suddenly the treetops began illuminating, brighter and whiter than moonlight. The camera struggled to focus as something emerged, a dark, egg-shaped blur hovering 10 to 15 feet above the canopy. No lights, no movement, just suspended perfectly still. After about 6 seconds, it rose slowly and disappeared from the frame. No additional wildlife appeared that night. I watched the clip repeatedly, trying to rationalize it as a lens smudge or light anomaly. But after 5 years of reviewing trail footage, I knew this was different. I'd seen countless environmental variations, bugs, bats, fog, snow, smoke, and this wasn't any of those. Packing up my gear, I drove to the ranger station near Wilson Creek, a small concrete building beside the fire lookout garage. My plan was to show Mike, the district ranger, the curious footage, but something was off when I arrived. A plateless black SUV was parked by the shed, and someone was already inside. I pulled into the station, noticing the windows were tinted pitch black. The front door, dropped open, which struck me as odd. Mike was usually strict about keeping the AC in and bugs out. As I stepped inside, I froze in the doorway. A stranger occupied Mike's desk, shuffling through printer paper. He was tall, around 6'2", dressed entirely in black suit, tie, dress shoes, with no ranger badge or patch. His dark, slicked-back hair and almost grey skin gave him an unsettling appearance, like someone who'd been under fluorescent lights too long. When he turned, his face showed no surprise, just a blank, disinterested look reminiscent of a bored cashier. "Is Mike around?" I asked. He nodded once. "He's off-site." Then he gestured to the printouts and asked, "You're with the Wildlife Survey, correct?" Before I could respond, he held out a black and white thermal image, one of my shots from a week ago, showing elk crossing a creek. "I hadn't uploaded this to the shared drive yet. Who are you with?" I pressed. He barely smiled. "We work parallel to your department. You don't need to be concerned." His voice was flat and controlled, each word carefully measured, hinting at a suppressed accent. "We've reviewed your recent capture from Unit D4. He continued, referring to the camera I just hiked to, whose footage I hadn't yet uploaded. He walked to a side table, retrieved a manila folder, and handed it to me. Inside were grainy printout stills from my video showing treetops, the shape above them, and a strange light. "We'll ask that you redirect your research efforts away from the upper ridge for the remainder of the season," he stated clinically. When I asked if something was happening up there, he simply looked at me and advised, "If you've seen anything unusual, we recommend you do not share those details outside of your team." I explained we were just volunteers without a formal team. He didn't respond. I left the folder on the desk and walked out. The SUSUSUSV was already gone when I looked back from the parking area 5 minutes later. I do wildlife tracking up in the Bitter Roots part-time, mostly motion-activated cameras, monitoring migration patterns, predators, that sort of thing. I'm not a ranger or anything. I'm freelance contracted through the state for seasonal work. My name's Amanda Keller. If that matters, I live down in Darby, Montana, so I usually cover the south end of the range. It's a quiet area. Hardly ever see anyone else up there unless it's hunting season. This was late September last year, still warm during the day, but the mornings were starting to get that cold, sharp edge. I hiked out around 6 a.m. to check 3 trail cams near Pyramid Ridge. Real remote spot. Takes a couple hours to reach from the access road. You have to cross a shallow stream and bushwhack part of it. That whole section was logged back in the 90s, so there are these weird openings surrounded by second-growth forest. Good animal movement, especially cougars. The first 2 cameras were fine. Caught a bear sniffing around a salt lick. A couple of elk passing through at night. Third one was mounted about 15 feet up a pine overlooking a ridge drop-off. I use a telescoping pole to swap the card out. When I got the SD card loaded into my tablet, I was expecting the usual deer, raccoons, maybe a fox. Instead, the third clip stopped me cold. It was time-stamped 2:41 a.m. 2 nights before. You could see the tree canopy below, just waving slightly in the wind. Then the light changed. Not brighter exactly, but different. That afternoon, I tried to upload the clip to our shared drive and my tablet crashed. Not just the video app, the whole system went dark. It took me 2 hours to get it to restart. And when it finally did, the SD card was blank. No files. I hadn't backed them up yet. I drove back out 2 days later to recheck the came and rah. When I got there, the unit was missing. Zip ties cut, mounting post gone, no note, no damage to the tree or signs of animals. We rotate cameras all the time, but no one from my group had been up there. When I emailed Mike asking who had access to the station that morning, he replied, "I was on fire watch all week. Nobody had my keys. I haven't brought it up again." Every now and then, I still drive past the canyon trailhead and think about hiking up there, but I never do. The last time I went near that slope, I swear I heard something above the trees. Not loud, just a soft mechanical hum like electricity in the air. I didn't look up. The infrared filter was glitching, barely holding steady. Above the trees, something hovered, not quite a craft, but a dark oval shape roughly the size of a minivan. It wasn't like typical UFO descriptions. No blinking lights, no hard edges. Just a silent, motionless presence that seemed to defy normal physics, not reflecting light, not casting a shadow. It simply existed in the camera frame for 10 seconds before rising straight up without disturbing a single branch. After the clip ended, the camera recorded nothing else for the rest of the night. Unusual, since that's typically when most activity occurs. I watched the footage repeatedly, slowing it down, adjusting contrast, but nothing revealed itself. This wasn't a bird, bat, or fog. My experience told me that much. I downloaded the file, labeled it, and hiked back down. My plan was to check with the rangers about potential weather balloon or drone surveys in the area. The ranger station sits about 30 minutes from the trailhead, a small building with a garage and shortwave tower, usually staffed by 3 people. Around 11 a.m., I pulled in and noticed a black SUV without markings or plates. Something about it felt federal, but not in the typical sense. Inside, office was eerily quiet, with no one at the front desk. When I knocked and entered the records room, a man I'd never seen before stood behind the computer terminal. He was tall and thin, dressed in a dark suit and black tie despite the 80-degree heat. His skin looked oddly colorless, like a desaturated photograph. Jet black hair combed flat. He didn't acknowledge my entrance initially. When I mentioned looking for Ranger Daly and having footage to show, he turned slowly, as if suddenly remembering my presence. His eyes were unnaturally still, and his voice didn't match his appearance, soft and dubbed-like. Before I could fully explain, he asked about the anomaly recorded on September 18th at 2:41 a.m. I froze, stunned. I hadn't mentioned anything about the specific date or time. I noticed something was off. When I went back to my truck after the encounter at the ranger station, the SUV's back hatch was slightly open. Inside, black cases were stacked neatly with no labels. I didn't hang around. That night, I tried to load the clip again. The file existed, same size and timestamp, but when I opened it, nothing but a black screen. No sound, no static. I tried copying it to my desktop and the system froze. A hard reset later, the file was completely gone. 2 days later, I went back to check the camera. It had vanished, no damage to the mount, no signs of animal interference. Just gone, pole and all. The zip ties remained on the tree like it had been carefully removed. I texted 2 other trackers who sometimes use that ridge. Neither had touched it. I logged a note, but no one followed up. My phone started acting strange that week. Poles dropping, screen freezing, compass spinning. I initially blamed bad mountain signal, but it continued even in town. 3 days after the ranger station incident, I saw the same black SUV parked across from a closed antique store in Hamilton. No driver, engine off, just sitting there. I waited 10 minutes pretending to check receipts. It didn't move. Then I drove home. The conversation started when he told me they'd been monitoring data inconsistencies in the sector. "Who's we?" I asked. He smiled. Not a genuine smile, but something that looked like an imitation. "You're advised to redirect your research efforts elsewhere," he said. His calm, flat tone made my stomach twist. When I asked what that meant, he turned back to the screen and started typing. "I've still got cameras in other forest areas, but I haven't returned to Pyramid Ridge. Not out of fear, but because I don't want to see him or whoever else might be involved." The kind of quiet he had didn't feel normal. Whatever was on that clip, something wasn't right. That winter, I was renting a small converted woodshed just outside Glover, Vermont. After everything fell apart in Boston, I needed somewhere cheap and quiet. The place was simple. Just one room with a cot, a heater, and a desk. I'd been diving deeper into backyard astronomy, nothing professional, just an amateur setup with a used 8-inch Schmidt Cassegrain telescope mounted on a skywatcher. I had a perfect spot behind the cabin where I could leave my telescope undisturbed, far from city lights. The winter nights up there offered some of the clearest skies I'd ever seen. That Tuesday was special. I'd just gotten approval to work remotely for a Portland graphic design firm and celebrated with a beer and grilled cheese before checking out the Orion Nebula. Around 1:30 a.m., something strange happened while I was scanning near Betelgeuse. There was a star to the northeast, one I'd noticed before, but this time it behaved differently. It didn't just flicker from atmospheric distortion, this was a hard, deliberate blink. Gone, then back. The pattern was distinct. 3 quick flashes, a long pause, 2 more flashes, then nothing. I spent the next hour locked onto that spot, trying to understand what I'd seen. I checked everything, my notes, lenses, power source, even swapped eyepieces. Nothing explained the phenomenon. Eventually, I logged the experience and chalked it up to fatigue or a trick of light. 2 nights later, something even more unsettling occurred. My observatory was really just a window with a blackout panel, allowing me to keep the telescope inside while opening it to the cold. Around 2 a.m., half dozing at my desk and waiting for cloud cover to clear, I noticed movement through the curtain's gap. A man was standing completely still just beyond the tree line. I know what I saw, but now the footage is gone. I was using the observatory telescope when I noticed him. A tall, thin figure standing about 30 feet away, completely still. He wore a black overcoat and dark slacks, skin almost bluish in the moonlight, with no gloves despite the snow. His telescope was mounted on a matte black tripod with no visible markings. At first I thought someone might be playing a prank, but there were no footprints in the freshly fallen snow. Not a single disturbance in the 2 inches of white that had settled earlier that afternoon. For 10 minutes, he remained motionless. No adjustments, no note-taking, just staring intently through the eyepiece. Unsettled, I closed the blackout panel and sat on the floor, unsure how to react. Calling the police seemed ridiculous. When I looked again just before dawn, he was still there. By sunrise, he had vanished without a trace. I tried to forget the incident and didn't mention it to the farmhouse owners. I stopped using the telescope for a while. 2 days later, something strange appeared. A black paper bookmark-sized note was taped to the observatory window, featuring a perfect white circle in its center. No tape edges, no moisture damage. It wasn't there when I went to bed, and by noon it had disappeared. No wind, no footprints. The following week, odd occurrences multiplied. The cabin's power flickered continuously. My telescope mount began drifting slightly off its calibration, no matter how often I reset it. One night I found the scope inexplicably pointed toward the woods. Then came the whispering. Not voices, exactly, but a low mechanical hum just at the edge of perception. I tried recording it, but the playback always came out blank. Another night I heard slow, deliberate footsteps crunching in the snow around the cabin. I killed the lights and waited. When I opened the door, the yard was empty. I had been driving steel coils to El Paso, hauling through New Mexico on I-25 south around 3:30 in the morning, late April, with dry, clear skies and cool enough that the AC wasn't needed. The road was quiet, just occasional northbound rigs breaking the silence. An old country ballad crackled through the AM radio as I cruised, everything blurring into a monotonous landscape of dotted lines and exit signs. I knew this stretch well. The overpass ahead usually emerges gradually, its structure silhouetted by headlight reflections on road signs, but something felt different this time. Perched atop the overpass was a shape, flat, wide, and low. At first, I thought it might be highway equipment or a crane. As I drew closer, I realized it was neither. A perfect, matte black triangle sat motionless, not parked but perched, with no lights or markings. My foot eased off the gas and the truck began to slow. I didn't brake, just coasted. Something inside me hesitated to drive underneath. When I was about 100 yards out, I blinked. And just like that, it was gone. Not flying away, not fading, simply absent. A year earlier, similar strange experiences driven me from a remote cabin. I'd stopped sleeping, moved my telescope inside, and sealed every window. A knife stayed close, a desperate attempt to feel secure. On my final night, the stars vanished, not behind clouds, but completely. After 15 or 20 minutes of pitch-black void, they returned simultaneously, as if nothing had happened. The next morning I packed everything and left before sunrise, saying nothing to the farmhouse owners. I just drove. Since then, I haven't touched the telescope. I came to a full stop in the middle of the lane. No other cars around, just me and the quiet whine of the engine idling. I flipped on the hazards and stepped out, walking a few feet from the cab to look up at the overpass. Nothing. I climbed the embankment and stood on the shoulder, scanning the landscape. No tire tracks, no fresh scuffs on the pavement. Just empty road and desert stretching endlessly. 15 minutes passed before I climbed back into the truck and eased it forward. Everything felt unnaturally silent. The radio had dissolved into static. I didn't stop until reaching the Flying J on the edge of Socorro. Parking around back, I killed the engine, grabbed a sandwich from the cooler, and went inside to stretch my legs. The place was deserted. An old guy manned the register. With a couple of drivers nodding off in the lounge, I settled into a corner booth, food and coffee in front of me, facing the window. I wasn't hungry, just needed a moment to shake off the weird feeling. That's when he appeared. I hadn't seen him enter. He slid into the booth across from me, silent, clean-shaven, pale as a sheet, wearing a crisp black suit and tie that looked freshly pressed. No jacket, no bag. His hands folded neatly on the table. What struck me most was how immaculate he looked, in the middle of a desert truck stop. His shoes were polished, his clothes completely dustful. Initially, he stared past me out the window, watching the fuel pumps. Then, without blinking, he spoke. "Routes change when you watch the sky," he said, his voice flat and emotionless, like words read from a card. I remained silent, coffee suspended midway to my mouth. Finally looking at me, he stated, "You didn't drive under it." When I asked what he meant, he didn't respond. Instead, he stood and walked out calm, as if he'd completed his purpose. I followed, driven by curiosity. But when I stepped outside, he was gone. The parking lot held only a few rigs and a fuel tanker. I asked the cashier if anyone else had come in. He looked puzzled and said no, not in the last half hour. Checking the security camera monitor above the counter, I watched it cycle through Phoebe's lot, Ump's diner area, front door. Nowhere did I see him. Not entering, not leaving. I've been running the midnight ferry out of Port Townsend for 11 years now, and I don't usually share this story, but it's been weighing on me longer than I expected. It happened on a Thursday night in early May. Clear skies, water smooth as a mirror. We were on the late run, just me, a deckhand named Eli, and a handful of passengers heading to Whidbey Island. The night started pretty normally. We left the dock around 12 or 5 a.m., about 10 minutes behind schedule due to some late arrivals. By 12:20, most passengers had gone inside to escape the chill. The night was eerily still. No wind, no waves. Every sound was crystal clear, the engine's steady hum, ropes creaking, Eli fiddling with his vape behind the cabin. I was up in the wheelhouse with autopilot on. Scanning ahead, as always, I don't listen to music. I prefer hearing what's around me. About 2 miles from the island, something caught my eye off our starboard side. A glowing orb, bluish-white, basketball-sized, hovering about 6 feet above the water's size face. It wasn't flying like a drone, it was gliding perfectly paced with our ferry. No sound. At first I thought it might be a strange light reflection. But when I stepped out onto the side deck for a better view, it was still there, skimming smoothly alongside us. I called Eli up without explaining what I'd seen, just asked him to look. He leaned over the railing and froze. "You seeing that?" I asked. He nodded, whispering, "What the hell is that?" We watched it for maybe a full minute before it veered away sharply, a 90-degree turn with no arc, just sudden. Later, I drove to El Paso without stopping. The entire journey, strange things flickered in my side mirror, shadows that didn't match the road, lights dancing in the hills, unconnected to towers or traffic. At one point, a black SUV sat on the shoulder, headlights off, with the driver wearing sunglasses. At 5 a.m., who would I even tell? The dispatcher? State police? I've driven that route dozens of times since. The overpass remains unchanged. Nothing seems strange. But now, I don't slow down when I pass underneath. I just keep my eyes fixed on the road ahead. I zipped out over the water, climbing quickly to about 30 feet before shooting straight into the clouds and disappearing completely. No sound, no trail, nothing. I've seen weird lights out here before, so I didn't report it. Maybe it was some experimental drone, I thought. I didn't want it in the log. The next morning around 7:30, I got a call at home. Dispatch sometimes checks in early about mechanical issues, but this wasn't anyone I recognized. A guy claiming to be from the Coast Guard wanted to do a surprise safety inspection before our next run. They arrived at 10 o'clock in a black SUV with no Coast Guard markings. Two men in plain black suits and white shirts, no ties, no clipboards, no tools, no IDs. One was tall and thin with almost grayish skin. The other was shorter, stockier, wearing old-fashioned black glasses that looked like they'd been untouched since the 1950s. No handshakes, no introductions. They just asked to walk through the... I figured they might be undercover, though. Something felt off. Eli hadn't arrived yet when I brought them aboard. In the wheelhouse, they didn't check logs or equipment. The tall one stood by the door while the one with glasses stared out the window. "You ever see anything unusual on these waters?" he asked, still gazing outside. I said to define unusual. He turned and gave me a deadpan smile. I shrugged. "Sometimes you see things, lights, shapes that don't belong. Did you see anything last night?" the tall one asked. Something about his tone felt wrong, too direct, like he already knew the answer. I lied and said it was a routine night. The short one stepped closer. "You sure?" He pressed. "Some people imagine things when they're tired." I looked him straight in the eye. "I don't imagine things." He didn't blink, didn't move, just held that intense stare. And they wanted to see the lower deck. They didn't ask about lifeboats or fire suppression, didn't check the engine room. They just walked slowly along the edge, glancing out at the water. We docked at the island around 12:45, dropped off passengers, and loaded up for the return trip. Everything went like normal. "Anyone with you last night?" the tall investigator asked. I mentioned Eli was on deck crew. Did he see anything? They nodded, seeming less interested in what I witnessed and more focused on whether I'd discuss it. We completed our walkthrough and returned to the dock. When I asked about paperwork, the shorter one smiled and said, "No need, just routine." They drove off in their SUV, and I waited until they were gone before calling Eli. I warned him not to mention anything about the light. He Ted agreed. During our next evening run, Eli brought binoculars. We scanned the water constantly, but nothing appeared. No lights, no orbs. 2 nights later, after a 1 a.m. trip from the island, I discovered my truck had been subtly moved, just a few inches, barely off its usual line. My seat was also adjusted slightly lower. No signs of a break-in, nothing stolen, but the dome light wouldn't turn on when I opened the door. I checked under the dash, half expecting to find a tracker. Nothing. I haven't seen those two men again, yet for the next month, during every midnight run, I catch myself scanning the water. Not just for the orb, which I don't expect to see again, but for any sign someone was still watching. It was a Thursday around 3:10 a.m. My shift at Brook Hill Medical runs from 7 p.m. to 7 a.m., and we always restock crash carts at 3. That night had been unusually quiet, with no new admits since midnight. Sitting at the nurse's station in ICU 3 and catching up on charting, I noticed the hallway lights flickering. Only the row running past room 314 to the fire exit was affected. A short buzz, then back to normal. I didn't think much of it initially. The building's old, and the ICU's 5th floor occasionally experiences electrical surges from the HVAC system. About 10 minutes later, the flickering returned, longer this time. A slow dimming, fading in and out, accompanied by a faint clicking sound, almost like the hum beneath a transformer. I walked toward the fire exit to check for a faulty bulb. Passing room 314, I noticed the double door blinds were open. Mr. Double Door blinds were open. Dr. Garza, a long-term patient, was inside. The patient lay intubated and sedated, not conscious but moving. One hand raised toward the ceiling, eyes shut. The monitors showed nothing unusual. I watched his hand slowly fall back to the bed. Through the window behind him, movement caught my ear, sent professional ye. Our small rooftop area accessible only to maintenance stretched out, covered in gravel, vent hoods, and large metal HVAC units. During the day, housekeeping sometimes props the door open to air out the linen room. At night, it's just dark, but something was up there. A flicker of movement behind a vent stack, a tall, narrow shape standing unnaturally still, watching. I thought it might be security doing rounds, but we don't typically have anyone up there unless something's broken. I stepped closer to the window. No face was visible, but the shape was clear, not crouching or walking, just standing perfectly upright, backlit by city lights reflecting off the cloud cover. The head tilted slightly, arms hanging too straight, like a mannequin trying to look human. Then the lights flickered hard. When they stabilized, the shape was gone. I radioed the front desk. No one was on the roof. Security confirmed the access hatch remained locked from the inside. I didn't report what I'd seen, chalking it up to exhaustion or a trick of shadows. But unease settled in. That part of the unit felt colder. Other nurses joked about ghosts in the vents later, but I didn't laugh. As my shift ended, I headed to the break room to clock out. Halfway there, a man near the vending machine stopped me. He didn't belong. Dressed in a pressed black suit, pale and neat like he'd stepped from a fashion catalogue. No badge, no scrubs, not looking like a rep, doctor or security. He stood facing the elevators, a slim black folder under his arm. Something about him made my stomach drop. As I walked past, he stepped forward and said my full name, not excuse me, but like he already knew me. I stopped in my tracks. A folder was thrust into my hands. The single page looked nothing like an official document. Printed on plain white paper, it detailed an anomalous rooftop event. Witness/command. Witness/command. D between 2:45 a.m. and 3:30 a.m. on April 11th. The statement required my agreement to remain silent about any visual or auditory phenomena observed during that time. No hospital letterhead, no official markings, just a line for my signature and spaces for date and time. When I asked about the document, he responded with clinical precision, "This is for the hospital's internal review. It will not impact your employment record. Cooperation is strongly advised." His voice carried no emotion, the words sounding like a mechanical translation. I noticed his tie pinned a strange symbol, a circle with a line through it. Not a brand logo, something unrecognizable. My response was immediate. I wouldn't sign anything without a supervisor present. He didn't react, just stood motionless, holding the folder out, unblinking. An elevator dinged. 2 people stepped out. Without a word, he turned and walked away, disappearing down the hall toward the old records room. That afternoon, I showed the form to my supervisor. Her reaction was puzzling. She knew nothing about any internal reviews or rooftop incidents. All hospital forms went through admin, she insisted. She took the folder, promising to investigate. The next night, she reported the folder was completely empty. I haven't seen the mysterious man since. But occasionally, when I'm near the supply elevator in the West Wing, I sense someone watching from behind the old roof access door. The lights still flicker. Same hallway, same time. My live stream at Devil's Bluff started like any other. This rocky overlook past Kingsfield, surrounded by dense forest, had always been local legend. Weird occurrences were common, strange lights, electronic glitches. My podcast signal scan wasn't mainstream. Just a small platform attracting late-night radio enthusiasts and conspiracy followers. But my audience was dedicated. It was a confet, monumental.
Riz. Clear, Saturday night in early April. I'd been hyping up a midnight stream all week, teasing viewers from the bluff with talks about old sightings and taking questions from chat.
My gear was ready. A mic rig, external battery and laptop. Setting up took some time, especially since I'd cobbled together a hotspot through a portable satellite dish to get signal in this remote area. The stream started like any other. Video was grainy, which my audience seemed to enjoy, all about that low-light, fuzzy atmosphere with wind rustling in the background. Around 12:30 a.m., something strange happened mid-conversation. A faint whisper, barely audible under the static and wind. Just a quick, flat sound like someone saying, "Leave now." Mechanical, almost like a recording. I paused, wondering if my headset was picking up interference. When I asked chat if they'd heard it, a few viewers confirmed. Someone typed, "Play that back." So I did. The whisper was definitely there, just beneath my voice. I tried to laugh it off, joking about woodland pranksters, but I still muted the mic and scanned the tree line with my flashlight. Nothing moved, just rocks, brush, no signs of life. My rational brain checked for technical explanations. No other input sources were running, and I couldn't find any cross-signal issues. The stream continued, with viewers tagging the moment and spinning timestamps theories. I played along. You've got to keep the audience engaged, right? Then things got weird. Around 1:45 a.m., my laptop froze completely. Not a crash, but a total lockup. The screen stayed lit, but nothing responded. Mouse, keys, all dead. Audio cut out, though the hotspot still blinked like everything was normal. When I tapped the laptop lid, nothing happened. Suddenly, the fan roared to maximum volume, sounding like it was about to take off. Yet the metal casing remained cold. A low, static buzz leaked through my headset with no recorder waveform. Something felt off. The trees were unnaturally still, and I kept catching glimpses of something black shifting just beyond my light. I packed up fast. Whatever was happening, I didn't want to stick around to find out. I got back to my car, parked about half a mile down the trail, with an unsettling feeling. Something felt off, not footsteps exactly, but a strange pressure. Like someone was walking behind me, stopping whenever I stopped. I drove home without seeing another vehicle, heading to my basement apartment in Kingsfield. After getting inside and locking the door, I collapsed on the couch. The next morning, I started processing the stream to get it posted. That's when things got weird. The file was there, labeled and time-stamped for 2 hours, but the last 30 minutes had vanished completely. It wasn't cut off, just gone, as if the stream ended cleanly at 1:30. Even though I knew I was up there past 2, I checked everything local save, cloud backup, and got the same result. The stream dashboard showed no errors, no drops. The chat feed had timestamps running to the end, but the video cut mid-sentence, just stopping abruptly. Around 3 p.m., there was a knock at my door, unusual for this place. I live on the side of a duplex with a shared driveway, and nobody ever uses the front entrance. When I opened it halfway, 2 men stood on the porch. Black suits, black ties, white shirts, no coats. One wore round glasses, the other didn't. Neither was smiling. "Mr. Pierce?" the glasses-wearing man asked. I nodded. He held out a small USB stick. "You'll want to back up your recording properly," he said. I took it without thinking. His companion commented that the audio quality was good, with interference starting around 147. Their voices were flat, deliberate like news anchors, with no accent or warmth. "WO. Who are you with?" I asked. They exchanged a look. "We suggest you reconsider the narrative," one replied. Then they turned and walked down the drive. No car was visible. By the time I reached the sidewalk, they had disappeared. Back inside, I plugged in the USB. A single folder labeled DB Stream Final contained 2 files, video and audio, both full length at 2 hours, 3 minutes. My intro, the questions, the whisper, all there. But the last hour was different. It wasn't blacked out or cut. Instead, it was replaced. My voice kept talking, but not in real time. It was like a stitched-together monologue, cobbled from older clips. "My name is Dylan Carr. I was working a contract job in southeast New Mexico, near an old radar tower outside White Oaks. The tower, a Cold War relic, had been shut down for decades and was now fenced off and rusting. Some private development was in the works, so our team was brought in to do soil cores and subsurface testing. It was late September, when desert heat dropped sharply after sunset. We were working long days, trying to complete as many drill sites as possible before the cold set in. Our trailer sat about 200 yards from the tower's base. While we weren't allowed past the fencing, several of our bore sites ran within 50 feet of it. On the 3rd day, I was working alone while the other guys went into town to resupply. I'd done this drill core routine a dozen times before. Drop the bit, pull out soil, catalog it, mark groundwater. Boring work, but I enjoy solitude. My radio was clipped to the truck, lunch in the cooler, enjoying the peace and quiet. That day, something unusual happened. About 5 feet down, I hit something solid. Not rock, but metal. Clean, unrusted. I pulled the bit back up, expecting it to be jammed, but it was pristine. Using a small hand auger, I scooped around the object for about 20 minutes before pulling up a shard. The piece was maybe 5 inches long, tapered an inch wide at its thickest point, completely smooth like glass, yet metallic. No seams, no markings, cold to the touch despite being underground in sunlight. Strangely, it didn't feel right. Not heavy, just off. I cleaned it, took a photo, and set it on my fold-out table next to the logbook. Later, I started noticing odd things. Chat responses that didn't match questions. Weird episode edits. Dead air filled with forest sounds I never recorded. No static, no laptop freeze, just a calm, fake version of me wrapping up a seemingly normal show. I checked the metadata. Creation date was that morning. Author field blank. No location tags. No editing software listed. I haven't done a live stream since. The site was quiet after dark. Just wind through mesquite and occasional coyote calls. I'd finished 2 cores that day, wrapping up just before sundown. Earlier, I'd found something unusual among the usual scraps left over from the radar days. Bolts, old cables, typical site debris. But this piece felt different, refined. No corrosion, like it hadn't aged at all. Back in the trailer, the generator hummed low, and I was heating up a can of chili when someone knocked. No vehicle sounds, no approach possible on the gravel and scrubbed terrain. When I opened the door, a man stood there, black suit, white shirt, shiny shoes, completely dust-free and looking entirely out of place in this remote location. He didn't introduce himself. His pale face showed no expression as he said directly, "You found something today." His voice was quiet but cut clearly through the generator's background noise. When I asked what he meant, he nodded toward the table inside. The object? May I look? Something in his manner made me feel I couldn't refuse. He entered slowly, keeping his hands behind his back, and studied the shard carefully without talk, ouching anything. After a moment, he straightened and said simply, "Some artifacts belong underground." Then he turned and walked out. I followed, hoping to see where he went, but he had vanished. No vehicle, no sound, no trace. Checking the gravel road with my flashlight revealed no tire tracks. That night, I barely slept. I wrapped the shard in a towel and locked it in my toolbox, convinced I heard footsteps outside, but finding nothing when I looked. Next morning, I said nothing to my co-workers. I went about the day normally, but kept the shard hidden in my truck's glove box. I couldn't explain why, but I wasn't ready to let it go. We rented a Catalina 36 out of Crescent Harbor, just south of Ventura. The boat was perfect for our family. Me, my wife Allison, and our daughter Grace, who had just turned 11. Our plan was a simple 3-day sail up the coast, anchoring near secluded beaches and sleeping on board. We'd done something similar the year before, and it had been peaceful. No internet, no noise, just ocean. The marina equipped us with a logbook, clipboard, and spare keys. I plotted our course out to San Miguel for a night, then east toward the shoreline to anchor off Refugio Beach. Our final stop was supposed to be just past El Capitan before heading back. Weather conditions were ideal, clear skies, light wind, smooth current, sunny but not scorching. By the second night, we were anchored about 100 yards offshore west of Gaviota. I was running the stove for coffee while Grace watched the horizon through binoculars. Allison was inside wrestling with a flickering cabin light that wouldn't stabilize despite a full battery. Around 9:20 p.m., just past nautical twilight, Grace called out, "There's a star in the water." When I looked, I saw a small white globe just above the ocean, almost level with the horizon. It wasn't moving, no water reflection, just suspended there, maybe 2 or 3 feet above the surface. The light was round but not sharp, with blurred edges like fog. I initially thought it might be a drone from a research boat or something from the Navy base down south. But then the light started to rise, not quickly, not slowly, just upward. Later, after the contract ended, I took a shard home and stored it in a drawer in my garage. About a week afterward, I returned from work to find my garage door wide open. Nothing was stolen or disturbed except that specific drawer, which was now empty. No forced entry, no fingerprints, no camera footage. The shard was simply gone. That same night, a business card appeared under my front door. No name, no number, just a black circle on white cardstock. I tossed it away and haven't seen anything since. The water lapped steadily against the hull, the breeze constant. We stood motionless, watching a light hovering about 50 feet off the water. No blinking, no side-to-side movement, just suspended, defying gravity. Then everything electrical started failing. The mast light dimmed, cabin light shut off. I tried the switches, the radio, nothing worked. The GPS screen turned grey with no signal. Even the emergency beacon gave only a weak red blink before dying. Strangely, the boat didn't feel dead. Sound and motion remained unchanged. We weren't talking, but not out of fear. More like we wanted to avoid drawing attention. Grace asked to go inside, and Allison took her below deck. I kept watching the light. Slowly it began moving east along the horizon, staying low, never rising more than 100 feet above the surface. I tracked it until it vanished behind the coastline's curve. Maybe 3 minutes passed. 5 minutes later, everything powered back on simultaneously. The cabin light flickered. GPS reset. Radio returned to standby. No error messages, no logs of any interruption. When we returned to the harbor the next afternoon, I said nothing about the incident. A tall man in a black suit, oddly dressed for a marina, asked for our logbook. He flipped directly to the second page, didn't read the cover, and simply stated, "You were west of Gaviota last night." I nodded. He paused, handed back our key fob, and said cryptically, "Some voyages end before the dock." I took the keys and left. Since then, I've returned to the marina. Nobody recognizes the man. The regular staff insist he's not one of them. This happened while I was mapping sinkholes for the State Geology Department, south of Gainesville, Texas. The late September days were warm and dry, with nights cooling down quickly. I was working on a massive pasture that stretched out endlessly, with barely a fence line in sight. Miles of grass and scrub covered the landscape, punctuated by small hollows and depressions. Most were harmless, but some sinkholes could suddenly collapse. My job was to document these areas and warn landowners. I'd been driving my pickup along dirt trails for days, marking GPS points whenever I discovered something noteworthy. One afternoon, a particular hole caught my attention. It wasn't large, maybe 10 feet across, but something felt different. The grass around its edges looked unusually thin and smooth, almost polished. As the sun lowered, casting long shadows, I crouched down to inspect it more closely. That's when I first noticed the humming. It was low and constant, not typical of a sinkhole. Sitting quietly on the ground, I tried to distinguish it from the background noise, insects, wind rustling through grass. The hum seemed to be coming directly from the hole itself, more of a vibration you could feel through your boot soles than a sound you could hear. I pulled out my phone and recorded the audio, though weak. A steady drone was audible. Curious but not alarmed, I assumed it might be related to natural gas. I took measurements, photographed the area, and marked it on my map, planning to report it to my supervisor when I returned to town. That night, I camped near the pasture's edge with my old tent, camp stove, and a cooler of food. The sky was crystal clear, stars sharp and bright. It was one of those nights that feels simultaneously quiet and heavy. Outside my tent, I listened intently for the hum, which seemed deeper and more persistent in the darkness. Around midnight, something else caught my attention. A faint crunch of tires on dirt. Freezing, I peered out towards the pasture. The moon was just a sliver, but enough to make out shapes. 2 ATV-sized vehicles were moving slowly and deliberately through the grass, their headlights off, heading directly toward the sinkhole. I wanted to call out or signal with my lantern, but something held me back. The air felt charged, as if my presence was somehow inappropriate. The vehicles stopped near the hole, and 2 men emerged, dressed entirely in black. They looked like security personnel or federal agents, but something felt distinctly unofficial about their demeanor. 2 men in plain black suits and hats moved purposefully around a strange hole, scanning the area with small black devices that had blinking lights and buttons. I watched from behind a tree, hidden from view. One of them knelt down and placed his hand near the hole's edge. The humming sound grew stronger for a moment, then stopped completely, as if the hole had gone silent. They exchanged quiet words, and one of them approached me. Despite my initial hesitation, he spoke calmly, "You shouldn't be here." I stepped out slowly, hands raised to show I meant no harm. His eyes were cold and sharp as he told me this site wasn't for study. I explained I was mapping sinkholes for the state and described the strange humming, but he seemed uninterested. "Some places aren't meant to be disturbed," he said firmly. When I asked what he meant, he simply instructed me to go home and not return. His companion watched me intently, silent but alert. That night, I packed up my camp with an unsettling feeling, like I'd stumbled into something forbidden. During the drive back to Gainesville, I kept checking my rearview mirror, half expecting black ATVs to be following me. I never reported the incident to my supervisor. The next day, I returned with a coworker, but the hole had vanished. The ground looked completely normal, with no dip or sign anything unusual had occurred. Even my phone recording of the hum had disappeared, as if it had never existed. A few months later, I still can't explain what I witnessed or who those men were, but one thing was certain. It was far more than just a simple sinkhole. I was wiping down the counter when something caught my eye through the glass doors. A tiny point of light hovered about 50 feet from the entrance, near the parking lot's edge. It wasn't like a typical star or aircraft light. This light remained completely stationary, steady and unmoving. At first I thought it might be a reflection from a street lamp or headlights, but the lot was empty, and the nearest street lamp was a block away, too distant to cast light in this area. Throughout my shift I kept noticing it during breaks and while restocking. What struck me as strange was how the light remained fixed in exactly the same spot. It never drifted or flickered, and seemed dimmer than any normal light source. Sometimes it appeared closer, sometimes farther, but always hanging in place, almost like it was watching. Around 3:30 a.m., the light suddenly brightened. I wondered if it might be an abandoned flashlight or lantern. But when I looked out, nothing one with these fare. Now, as there, no car, no person, just me, alone. Suddenly, the store's outdoor security camera blinked off. The indoor monitors flashed static briefly before returning to normal. I couldn't tell if this was a technical glitch or something more unusual, but it felt connected to the mysterious light. Curiosity got the better of me. Around 4 a.m. I grabbed my jacket and stepped outside. The early fall air was cold and damp, the parking lot still empty except for that persistent light. As I approached its location, it vanished instantly. No flash, no movement, just gone. I returned inside feeling unsettled, but trying to rationalize the experience as a trick of light or fatigue. The next morning, after my 6:30 a.m. shift ended, something else happened. Standing just outside the glass doors was a man in a black suit, staring intently inside. His tie seemed out of place in our casual town, and his neat hair and blank expression suggested he was waiting for something. I froze. The parking lot remained empty. Only my car and the store's delivery truck were present. My plan was simple: grab my bag and leave. But something about this stranger made me hesitate. I was out early that morning, just after the sun started coming up, fixing some trail signs along the ridge in the southern part of the forest preserve. The morning air was cool, still holding on to the dampness from the night. That quiet you get when the world's just waking up settled around me, birds starting their calls, leaves barely stirring. It was the kind of morning that makes you think the day is going to be normal. No surprises. I'd been working on the preserve for about 5 years, mostly doing maintenance like fixing signs and clearing fallen branches. Quiet work, nothing too exciting. I was halfway through replacing a faded directional sign near the edge of a cliff that overlooks the valley below. The trail there is narrow, and I had to be careful with my footing. Then I heard it, a low rumble, not like thunder, more mechanical, almost like a distant engine. I looked up toward the cliff face to my left, the one that drops off steeply into the trees below. That's when I saw it. A black disc, smooth and wingless, sliding silently behind the rock. It was about the size of a small car, but the way it moved didn't make sense. No typical flying, no wings or rotors, just that low rumble. It vanished behind the cliff quickly, but there was no way it could have landed or hidden completely without leaving some sign. I stood there for a while, heart-pounding, just staring where it had disappeared. The forest was silent again, except for the occasional bird call. No footprints, no scuff marks, nothing. I packed up my tools faster than usual. When I locked the door behind me later, there was a man standing outside, staring through the glass. He didn't move, just stood there, glancing away briefly and then looking back right at me. I didn't know if he was waiting for someone else or if he'd been there all night, but it felt like he was connected to whatever that light was the night before. I didn't say anything. I got in my car and left without looking back. The weird thing was, when I came in the next night to work again, the parking lot was spotless. The light was gone, and security footage from the night before had a blacked out hour exactly when I saw the light hover. No explanation, just that strange presence, and the man in black standing silently in the daylight, watching me leave like he was waiting for me to disappear. I returned to the trail early the next morning, hoping to understand what I'd seen the day before, The whole area around the cliff was now sealed off with yellow tape. A black SUV sat nearby, and a man in a perfectly tailored charcoal suit stood by the bound area, looking like he was waiting for someone. When I approached, he nodded as if he'd been expecting me. "You can't go past here," he said quietly, but firmly. I asked who he was, what agency he represented. Instead of answering directly, he pulled out a card with a simple black symbol on a white background, no department name, no contact information. "Why is this area closed?" I pressed. He looked at me with an intense gaze and said something that sent a chill down my spine. "There are things here that don't belong to this world. It's better if people don't come near." His face was deadly serious, no hint of humor or jest. When I pushed further, he simply smiled, a smile that never reached his eyes. "We take care of things that shouldn't be seen," was all he would say. From that moment, the trail section was officially off limits. My attempts to get answers from my supervisor went nowhere. Emails were ignored, calls stonewalled. It was as if the entire incident had been erased from official records. All week, I kept returning to the taped-off area, staring at the cliff where I'd seen that strange black disc. The forest felt different now, heavier, more ominous. At dusk, I'd catch fleeting glimpses of shapes moving just beyond my vision, forms that didn't seem quite right. During my patrols, I'd always spot the same black SUV parked near the trailhead, always empty, always waiting. The man in the suit never reappeared. I still wonder what was hidden behind that cliff. Whatever it wasn't meant to be discovered. The unbroken silence speaks volumes. Some mysteries are better left unexplored. Night shifts driving a taxi in Phoenix can get pretty weird. I'd spent a couple years navigating those empty roads, especially out near South Mountain, where darkness swallows everything except the occasional truck or late-night hiker. This particular night was around 11:30 p.m. when I got a call to pick someone up from a gas station near the 202. At first, I thought it was just another routine pickup, but the passenger was different. Mid-40s, wearing a black suit that seemed slightly off, like it was borrowed or bought second-hand. He had slicked back hair and dark sunglasses, even though night had already fallen. Without a word, he slid into the back seat. "Where to?" I asked. He gazed toward the desert and responded, "Somewhere I can see the stars clearly. I saw something incredible out there. I figured South Mountain would offer a good view, so I nodded and started driving." The radio hummed with static, almost whispering beneath the music. Outside, the desert remained silent, save for distant coyote howls. My passenger stayed quiet, staring out the window. After about 20 minutes, we pulled onto a side road where city lights faded and the sky opened up. He stepped out, looking upward. "You ever see anything you couldn't explain?" he asked softly. I shrugged, "Just stars and night animals." He smiled briefly and said, "I saw something hovering over the rocks. No lights, no sound, just present." Before I could ask more, he wanted to keep driving. We continued deeper into the desert outskirts on increasingly rough, less-traveled roads. Suddenly, I glanced in the rearview mirror and realized he was gone. The back seat was empty. I stopped the car, looking around. "No trace of him anywhere," I called out, but only wind answered. No footprints, no sign he could have walked away. Unsettled, I got back on the highway and headed home. Around midnight, an unknown number texted my phone. I was out in the field late that night, just after the sun dipped below the horizon. Early fall in southern Iowa meant the air was turning crisp, but the day's warmth still lingered in the soil. I'd been checking the corn rose harvest season was approval. Ching and I'm particular about how the stalks look. This farm has been in my family for generations, and I take pride in keeping it running right. Standing near the old 40s barn, I noticed something strange. At first, I thought it might be fireflies or a trick of light from the farmhouse windows. But then I saw them, 3 spheres, bright and perfectly round, rising slowly from the barn's roof. About the size of basketballs, they had an eerie, steady light, not flickering like a candle or anything natural. They hovered silently for maybe a minute, then drifted upward in unison, like balloons caught in a gentle breeze. But there was no sound, no wind, no rustling leaves. They simply disappeared into the dark sky, as if someone had switched off a light. I rubbed my eyes and looked again, wondering if I was imagining things, or if it might be some drone light show. Yet it was too quiet out here for such pranks. The farm is miles from the nearest town, and nobody comes around this late except me, or the occasional raccoon. Later that night, driving home, I noticed the black SUV behind me, its headlights dimmed, matching my speed perfectly. It stayed on my tail for miles, sometimes drifting just out of sight, sometimes close enough to see the darkened windows. I tried switching routes, taking side roads, but it followed. At one point, the SUV pulled alongside me and the passenger window rolled down. A voice, calm and steady, said, "Don't circle back." Before I could respond, the window rolled up and the SUV accelerated away, disappearing into the night. I spent the rest of the shift driving straight to my apartment, constantly checking my mirrors, feeling watched. Since then, I haven't taken any rides out past the desert. The man in black never called or contacted me again. But every time I drive past South Mountain at night, I swear I catch a shadow in the corner of Massey, and I keep wondering what exactly I was shown that night, and why I was warned never to go back. I went outside early, the dew heavy on the grass. Something felt off since that night with the glowing spheres. As I walked toward the corn, a black pickup truck caught my eye, parked just inside the southern field's edge. No familiar plates or stickers. Two men stepped out, dressed in dark suits and crisp white shirts. Their polished black shoes seemed out of place in the muddy field. They carried only folding rulers, which they unfolded and began using to measure the corn rows. "Can I help you?" One looked up, his expression completely blank. "We're here about your planting," he said firmly. "Planting?" I was confused. I've always planted corn. It's good for the soil. The other man stepped forward. "Your rows are too irregular. You need to adjust your planting. I've been farming these fields for decades. The rows follow the land's natural slope." "What exactly are you saying?" They exchanged a look, as if I should understand something I didn't. "Precision matters," the first man said. "Patterns need correction for safety." From what? They didn't elaborate. Instead, they packed up their rulers, got back in the truck, and slowly drove away, leaving tire tracks in the soft dirt. The rest of the day, my mind kept circling back to the glowing spheres and these strange men measuring my crops. It felt like a bizarre dream, but the tire marks were real. My hands trembled when I touched the corn stalks. That night, I stayed inside with the porch light on, an uneasy feeling settling over me. The wind was still, but every time I looked out the window, shadows seemed to move just beyond the tree line. I couldn't shake the sense that something was watching me. I kept trying to ignore the strange things happening around the farm, but the feeling wouldn't go away. Something felt like it was watching the rows of corn, waiting for me to change how I plant. I checked the field multiple times. Some rows looked flattened or pressed down, but there were no footprints or vehicle signs besides the truck tracks. The crops looked unhealthy in those spots, almost as if something had drained their life. When I told my cousin Dave about it, he just laughed, said I was probably just tired from too much work and imagining things, and I knew something was off. In the days that followed, weird occurrences kept happening. The porch radio would buzz with static even when unused. My dog Buddy started growling at empty spaces and refused to go near the barn. At night, I'd hear soft tapping against the windows, but when I looked outside, there was nothing, just empty fields and dark trees. One evening, I went to the barn hoping to find some answers. The air felt heavy, thick with damp earth and wood smell. Inside, shadows seemed deeper, almost swallowing my flashlight's beam. I didn't see the spheres this time, but I felt their absence like a weight. Walking slowly through the field, I thought about the men in black with their blank faces, who had told me to adjust your planting. A command, not advice. I'm not sure what they meant, or what would have happened if I hadn't listened. The next morning, I found myself straightening the rows, making them more uniform. It's been a couple weeks now. The strange noises in the shadows haven't completely disappeared, but they're less intense. I keep watching the night skies, hoping to understand. But the truth is, I still don't know what's going on with those spheres or the men in black suits. And honestly, I'm not sure I want to know. The abandoned site was colorful, with an edge of eerie needs. This is that made it perfect for my photography project. I'd arrived late afternoon, when the sun hung high but began its slow descent. Dry heat pressed against my skin, while a cool breeze stirred dust around my boots. Near a massive mural depicting twisted human figures with half-hidden faces and strange patterns, I set up my equipment. My plan was to capture the fading sunlight and play with emerging shadows. As I moved around, taking shots from different angles, everything seemed normal at first, but something strange began to unfold as the sun dropped lower. The shadows on the wall didn't align with anything visible. They shifted independently, stretching in directions that defied the sun's position. Sometimes shadows would vanish completely, even when their supposed source remained perfectly still. I initially dismissed these oddities as light tricks or wall texture playing with perspective. Yet after watching for nearly an hour, the shadows continued their inexplicable dance, bending and twisting with an unsettling autonomy. That's when I noticed him. Dressed in a crisp black suit that stood in stark contrast to the dusty desert landscape, he stood quietly at the mural's edge. His presence was so still I hadn't seen him initially. When our eyes met, I froze. He moved forward deliberately, his expression unnervingly blank. Without asking permission, he traced his fingers over my camera strap, examining the collection of pins from old shows and various travels. "Some frames aren't for the public eye," he said softly, his words hovering between a warning and a threat. Then impossibly, he turned and walked directly into the mural. Not beside it or near it, but through the painted figures, as if stepping through an invisible doorway. I blinked, certain I hadn't imagined it, but he had completely vanished. Standing there with my camera hanging from my neck, I tried to rationalize what I'd witnessed. But no explanation could account for a person simply disappearing into a painted wall. The wind was my only response when I called out, leaving me alone with my bewilderment. I went back to the mural the next day, under a merciless sun. The desert stretched out, unforgiving, no sign of the black-suited man, but that same feeling of being watched crept over me. Something was off with the shadows. They moved independently, detached from the objects casting them. Then I noticed the footprints. 2 sets perfectly pressed into the dirt, leading right up to the mural wall and vanishing as if whoever walked them had simply stepped into thin air. Back at the small motel that night, I sifted through my photos. At first, everything looked normal, but when I zoomed in, strange glitches appeared, ripples and flickering edges in the shadows. I wondered if my camera was malfunctioning. A persistent tapping sound came from the window, yet each time I looked, nothing was there. Unknown text messages filled with random letters cluttered my phone. I deleted them without a second thought. Following the tracks toward the highway revealed nothing unusual. As evening approached and I packed my gear, a car with black tinted windows and no plates pulled up. 2 men in business suits, no ties, crisp white shirts, polished shoes stepped out. One walked directly to me, examining my camera strap, much like the first mysterious man had. He locked eyes with me and spoke softly, "Be careful with what you capture. Not everything should be recorded." His companions silently scanned the mural before they both returned to their car and drove away, kicking up dust. Something shifted inside me. The desert felt smaller, more confined. These murals weren't just paint on concrete. They seemed like gateways to something beyond comprehension. Driving home that night, the road ad stretched endlessly before me, radio silent. Since then, I've returned to my regular work, but shadows catch my attention differently now. I find myself wondering if they're truly just shadows or if something else moves within them. Those photos remain private, never shared publicly. I don't know what exists behind the paint and light, and honestly, I'm not sure I want to find out. Some nights, I sit on my apartment building's roof, an old bench my only companion, watching and waiting always, watching the shadows. My roof has become my sanctuary over the years. A quiet space above the city's noise, perfect for my amateur astronomy. That September evening started like any other. I'd gotten home early from work, had dinner, and by 9:30 p.m., I was setting up my telescope amid leftover cushions. The night sky was dark and clear, stars bright and sharp. I focused on Cygnus, the swan constellation, a long-time favorite I'd been tracking, but something felt different this time. When I lined up my scope, a small star cluster near the constellation's tail seemed oddly displaced, shifted about 10 edge west from its previous position. I meticulously checked everything. My charts were accurate. Other constellations remained exactly where they should be. The stars themselves looked normal, steady and bright, but their pattern was unmistakably wrong. I spent the next hour observing, and the cluster remained in its unusual position, almost frozen in place. The next morning, I shared my observation with Leah, a geology student. She suggested it might be a reflection or light pollution, but I could sense her underlying curiosity. Returning to the roof the following night, the atmosphere was different. Low-hanging fog made city lights glow orange, and the sky felt heavier. Around 11 p.m., something else caught my attention. A black sedan parked me off, barely illuminated by the streetlight. A solitary figure sat inside, unmoving. I watched for 10 minutes, the car remaining completely still. Something felt off from the moment the figure didn't leave the car. At first, it seemed like someone might just be waiting or parked there. But then the passenger door opened and a man stepped out dressed in a dark suit with a black shirt and tie, moving with an almost clinical precision. like he was on a professional mission. I ducked behind my telescope, watching as he looked up toward the building. Instead of climbing the stairs or entering, he pulled out a small flashlight and aimed it directly at my telescope's lens. The light wasn't bright enough to blind me, but it caught the lens perfectly, creating a dull greenish reflection. I froze, unsure what to do. For about 20 seconds, he kept the flashlight trained on the lens. Then suddenly, he closed it, returned to the car, and drove off slowly and silently down the street. I sat there, heart racing, wondering whether to follow or call someone. By the time I moved, the street was empty. The next few days were tense. I constantly watched out my window, looking for the car or the man, but saw nothing. Yet I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. My nightly trips to the roof became unsettling. The stars didn't look right anymore, and the shifted cluster in Cygnus seemed strange. Weird occurrences began to accumulate. One night I heard footsteps behind me on the roof, but turning around revealed nothing. A whisper seemed to drift on the wind, with only leaves moving on the fire escape. At work the next day, my phone died unexpectedly, fully charged the night before, now completely dead. The battery never held a charge again. My laptop crashed. My neighbor complained about strange Wi-Fi issues and flickering lights with weird static. I kept silent about the people kept silent about the same. Man in the black suit in the car, not wanting to sound crazy, but I couldn't forget how he looked at me, how the flashlight seemed deliberately aimed to catch my attention. Late at night, I'm certain I see shadows moving just beyond my vision. A constant reminder that something fundamental has changed. Working the night shift as a railway inspector for a small freight company in Cheyenne, Wyoming, was usually quiet and routine. My job involved checking train cars for damage, verifying loads, and ensuring everything met specifications. This particular night was different. Around 2 a.m., I was inspecting a long freight train parked on a siding near the town's edge. The yard was dark, with only a few floodlights breaking the darkness. Early October's chill hung in the air, seeping into my bones. Equipped with my flashlight and clipboard, I methodically moved between the cars, checking brakes and couplers. Something strange happened between cars 23 and 24. A subtle metallic scraping sound caught my attention, coming from high up on the train's roof. I paused and shined my flashlight upward, but the beam revealed nothing. The yard lights and clouded moon provided minimal visibility. Then, unexpectedly, a dark shape moved swiftly along the train's roof, too quick and fluid to be human. It was more like a shadow or an animal, gliding with an unnatural smoothness. In an instant it vanished, seeming to melt into the darkness. My heart raced. I tried to rationalize the experience, convincing myself it was just a raccoon or large bird. I scanned the area thoroughly but found nothing. The mysterious noise didn't repeat, and I completed my inspection without further incident. As dawn broke, I headed to the small diner near the yard. It was about 5 a.m., and the place was just coming to life. Truckers, railroad workers, and locals filled the space, sipping morning coffee. I found a window booth and ordered eggs and toast, still unsettled by the night's events. That's when I noticed him. A man in an ill-fitting black suit sat alone at the counter, watching me intently. Something about him felt wrong, out of place. The stars no longer felt like home, and a sense of being watched lingered at the edge of the roof. I'd been working as a drone photographer for a little over a year, mostly doing industrial shots of oil rigs and construction sites. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills, and I enjoyed the challenge of capturing perspectives most people never see. The rig that day was off the Louisiana coast, a platform surrounded by water and a few supply vessels. Days later, I found myself in a diner, still thinking about what I'd seen. The memory nagged at me. A man had approached my table uninvited, sliding into the seat across from me with an intensity that made me uncomfortable. His suit was bought off the rack and never tailored, the collar too tight, the sleeves a little short. His hair was slicked back, his face pale and expressionless. 6 or 10 car lengths back, he asked quietly. I frowned, confused. He was talking about something I'd seen on the train roofs, but I couldn't recall the exact details. The shape was just above the cars, but I didn't catch a specific distance. He leaned forward. The exact position matters, he said, a hint of urgency in his voice. When I asked who he was, he simply smiled. The smile that didn't reach his eyes. Just someone keeping an eye on things, he replied. I tried to brush it up. I'm just a rail inspector. I don't know anything about shapes on roofs. He nodded slowly, as if he'd expected this response. Be careful, he warned before getting up and walking out. No one else in the diner had noticed him. When I looked back, he was gone. No car, no footprints, Nothing. I finished, eat my breakfast and returned to the yard, but something felt off. Over the next few days, I kept checking the spot he'd mentioned, but never saw anything again. Late at night, I'd sometimes hear a faint scraping sound, but it never repeated with that same strange pattern. I mentioned it to co-workers, but they laughed it off, saying I must have been tired or imagining things. But I knew what I saw. The man's visit stuck with me, the way he spoke, the way he seemed to know what I was talking about without explaining anything. I kept wondering why he was so interested in the exact distance of that shape. I never saw him again and never figured out what was on those train roofs that night. It's just something that happened. Left with questions I can't answer. I was out working on the Gulf, capturing footage for a client as the sun set and rig lights flickered on. Nothing seemed unusual that late summer evening, just another routine job. I'd launched my drone from a supply boat, circling the rig to get the shots needed. Halfway through the shoot, something caught my eye off to the northeast. At first glance, I thought it was another supply boat, but something felt different. The object was rounded, hovering quietly just above the water's surface, barely moving. My drone's camera captured it clearly, so I circled closer to get a better view. About the size of a small helicopter, this thing was eerily silent. No blinking lights, no visible engines or rotors, just a smooth, dark, rounded shape suspended against the sunset's fading light. It appeared completely motionless, almost suspended in time. After filming for a few minutes, I decided to return the drone to the boat. As I did, the object began moving slowly, drifting out over the open water with an unnatural quiet grace. Back in my New Orleans apartment that night, I reviewed the footage on my laptop. The ODAR object was crisp and clear against the dim sky, looking unlike any aircraft I recognized. I kept second-guessing myself, maybe an experimental drone or a weather balloon. Around 2 a.m., an unexpected knock disrupted the silence. Opening the door, I found a man in his mid-30s, dressed in black, standing with an unnervingly calm demeanor. "Mr. Carter?" he asked. Before I could fully process the situation, he stated firmly, "We need you to delete the footage you took tonight for everyone's safety." Confused and half asleep, I asked who he was. He didn't introduce himself, repeating only that the object I'd filmed couldn't be shared. When I pressed for more information, he remained cryptic. "Delete it," he insisted. Feeling uneasy, I tried explaining that I was just a contractor who didn't want trouble, but he just shook his head, offering no further explanation. I've spent almost a decade tracking wildlife in the Pacific Northwest, mostly deer, elk, and forest animals. It's a job that demands patience and keen observation, noticing broken twigs, hoof prints, and subtle signs that reveal an animal's path. I'm comfortable with the isolation, just me in the forest. A few weeks back, I was on a routine tracking walk when something unusual happened. A man in black showed up at my apartment, demanding I delete specific footage from my drone. His tone was unsettling, like someone not accustomed to being refused. I hesitated, but eventually agreed, asking for written confirmation. He simply smiled and said it wasn't necessary, that they trusted me to do the right thing. After he left, I stared at my laptop screen. The footage still showed the twilight scene, rig lights glowing and a strange rounded object hovering nearby. I considered calling the police, but knew my story would sound ridiculous. Instead, I backed up the footage onto a flash drive and hid it in a drawer. The next day, I contacted the rig's security office. They claimed nothing unusual had been reported that night, with the supervisor stating they were doing routine maintenance and had seen no strange objects. The man who visited me didn't look like typical security. No badge, no ID. When I inquired at the rig, nobody recognized his description. In the following days, things got weird. People at drone meetups started watching me subtly, just enough to make me uncomfortable. My phones would mysteriously lose battery when I tried uploading anything related to the rig. Files became corrupted, and computers started malfunctioning. I kept the footage hidden and stopped discussing the incident. I'm still not sure if the man was private security, government, or something else entirely, but it was clear they wanted to suppress something. I never saw him again, and the strange object disappeared from the footage after that night. These days I continue flying drones, but I stay far away from that particular rig. I was hiking a familiar trail, tracking deer movement through the forest. The day was grey and heavy, with the sky pressing down like a thick blanket. Recent rain had left the ground soft and muddy in patches. About an hour into my walk, something caught my eye. A perfect circle, roughly 10 feet across, sitting in the middle of a clearing. The ground inside this circle was completely flattened, as if a massive weight had rested there. Its edges were unnaturally precise, like a giant cookie cutter had sliced through the landscape. No leaves or branches disrupted the clean lines of this strange formation. When I knelt to investigate, I found no tracks, no signs of animal movement leading in or out. The surrounding mud appeared untouched, suggesting whatever created this circle had materialized and vanished without a trace. I walked around the perimeter, examining, charging the nearby trees and bushes. Everything looked normal, with just a few scattered broken branches typical of a forest path. But this circle was different. Unlike deer or elk bedding areas, which are usually rough and marked with clear trails, this spot was too perfect, too clean. I pulled out my phone to document the scene, hoping my wildlife tracking friends might offer some insight. Just then, a twig snapped behind me. Turning quickly, I saw two men emerging from the trees. They wore black suits that seemed more suited to a business meeting than a forest hike. Their appearance was immaculate, short, dark hair, clean-shaven faces, and serious expressions. Without a word, they approached the circle. One began methodically counting something along its edge, silently pointing at various spots on the ground. The others stood watching, neither of them acknowledging my presence. I remained silent, unsure what to say or do as they continued their strange investigation. I was out at the burned field before dawn, the landscape a desolate scene of charred earth and brittle stalks poking out like broken bones. A week-old fire had transformed the area, and even the rain from last night couldn't fully wash away the faint smell of smoke. The morning was thick with fog, so dense I could barely see beyond 20 feet, creating one of those silvery, muffled mornings I sometimes appreciate for their quiet and lack of distractions. Standing at the field's edge, I scanned the perimeter with my binoculars, checking for any potential rain issue. We get called in frequently for these checks, knowing that even an extinguished fire can leave hot spots that might flare up with a sudden wind. That's when I first noticed something unusual. Days later, I found myself haunted by an inexplicable encounter in the woods. It began with two men in black suits who appeared silently between the trees. Day T2X. Hen vanished without a word. I stood frozen, wondering if I'd imagined the whole thing, but the strange circular mark on the ground and the photos on my phone confirmed something had happened. I searched everywhere for similar reports, local news, hiking forums, wildlife blogs, but found nothing about mysterious circles or strange men. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about their sudden appearance and disappearance, feeling they were somehow connected to the circle. Returning to the spot the next morning, I found the circle still present but subtly changed. The ground looked drier, as if the forest was slowly trying to erase whatever had occurred. The usual wildlife kept their distance, and an unsettling feeling of being watched persisted. Over the following days, odd occurrences multiplied. Abrupt footsteps, an unfamiliar parked car, fleeting shadows at the edge of my vision. I tried to rationalize these as imagination or normal forest activity, but doubt crept in. Whatever that circle was, whoever those men were, they left an unexplainable mark. Suddenly, the forest didn't feel like just an animal habitat anymore. Something had changed, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something profound and mysterious was happening just beyond my understanding. Nothing but a shadow moving above the field, not like a bird or a plane, just hanging there. I blinked, and it took shape. A dark triangular form against the pale grey fog, hovering around 30 feet off the ground. No sound. No engine noise, no wind rush, just suspended in the mist, as if it belonged. I froze, trying to rationalize what I was seeing. A weather balloon? A drone? But nothing added up. No blinking lights, no propellers or wings. Slowly it shifted sideways over the burnt field, then vanished as silently as it had appeared, melting back into the fog. Standing dumbfounded, I watched the mist thin as the sun rose. The field remained unchanged, charred and quiet. I tried convincing myself it was morning haze playing tricks, but something in my gut knew different. Later that afternoon at the firehouse, I was still unsettled. Nursing a coffee and flipping through reports, a man walked in, black suit, no tie, perfectly pressed shirt, polished shoes, looking out of place in our dusty station. Dark hair slicked back, face sharp yet oddly blank, studying me without truly seeing me. "Afternoon," he said, voice calm and low. No introduction, no explanation for his presence. Before I could ask, he walked to the window, peering out toward the burned field. Without moving closer, he leaned in, carefully inspecting the scorch marks visible from our vantage point. Turning back, he locked eyes with me. "We appreciate your discretion," he said. Something about his presence made speaking difficult. I simply nodded. He lingered a few minutes, scanning the room as if seeing it for the first time, then left without another word. Afterward, I couldn't shake thoughts of that triangular shape in the fog and this mysterious visitor who appeared and disappeared so quietly. I've shared the story with very few. It felt like something best left unspoken. Maybe I was being watched after all. I was camping alone one weekend in the San Juan Mountains near Lake San Rizal. Early September brought cool nights but warm days, and I'd come seeking solitude. No phone signal, no internet, just woods and water. The first night passed quietly. I set up camp by the lake's edge on a flat spot with a mountain view, bringing my old camera to capture scenery and wildlife. After dinner, I sat by the fire, fiddling with my camera when something unusual caught my eye. Across the lake, near the tree line, a faint green light shot straight down from the sky, stopping precisely at the water's edge. No set, no sound accompanied this strange streak, just a quick, clean flash, unlike anything I'd seen before. It wasn't lightning or a firefly, almost like a slow-moving meteor, but with an unusual color that didn't burn out or fragment. I quickly switched the camera to manual and snapped a few shots, trying to capture the mysterious light. After staring for a while with no further activity, I returned to the fire, dismissing the incident as just a weird sky phenomenon. The next morning, fog blanketed the lake, creating a damp, silent atmosphere. Half asleep, I heard footsteps crunching through leaves behind my tent. When I poked my head out, a man stood near my cooler, completely out of place in these woods. He wore a full black suit and tie, his hair slicked back, face pale and unreadable. "Morning," he said in a low, calm voice. "Ah, hey," I mumbled, rubbing my eyes. He didn't smile. Since that morning, I avoid that field when fog rolls in. Late at night, I sometimes hear a low hum just beyond the edge of hearing. I can't explain what I saw or who that man was. But I'm certain it wasn't just a coincidence. The summer I volunteered at Cedar Hollow Park was supposed to be quiet and predictable. Deep woods surrounded me, city sounds long forgotten. But that morning changed everything. I first noticed him when he nudged my cooler with his shoe. His voice was low, almost a whisper. "This area is under new management." When I asked what he meant, he just stared, waiting for me to understand. "We're here to make sure no unauthorized activity takes place," he finally said. My stuff was scattered now. Cans and a half-empty water bottle spilled onto the dirt. A small card with an official-looking seal emerged from his jacket, though I couldn't make out details in the dim light. My stomach tightened. Authorized by who? He didn't explain. Something felt off. The way he moved, the send, ditcher, words he chose. He was communicating without actually saying anything. I packed up quickly, avoiding direct eye contact. When I glanced back after walking down the trail, he had vanished. During my hike to the car, I kept reviewing the previous night's photos. A green streak cut through the images, sharp and almost luminous. But zooming in revealed something odd. Where the streak touched the lake, a dark shadow existed. No ripples, no splash. Nothing you'd expect from something entering water. At a local diner, I asked around about strange lake occurrences. Locals shrugged, mentioning occasional weird lights in the mountains, maybe ball lightning or gas. No one spoke about suited men or new management. Back home, I checked the news. No crash reports, no searches, no missing hikers. The lake appeared unchanged. I've returned to that spot several times since, but the man in black never reappeared. What was that green light? Why did someone come to declare the lake's new management? The place looked the same, trees, mountains, quiet landscape, yet something fundamental had shifted, an invisible boundary crossed. A sense that this familiar terrain now held unknown secrets. I was helping the rangers at the park, mostly working early mornings and late afternoons. That particular week, I was on the night shift, keeping an eye on things after dark and making sure visitors stayed on the trails. The night was crisp and clear, with the moon hanging bright overhead, casting long shadows through the trees. After the last group left around 11 p.m., I stayed late, finishing some paperwork at the station. The park was silent, broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves or a distant owl's call. Wanting to stretch my legs, I decided to take a quick walk down one of the less-traveled trails near the Old Oak Grove. The air was rich with the scent of damp earth and pine. Light filtered through the branches in thin, pale strips. Suddenly, something caught my eye. A smooth, almost perfect shape drifted silently between the trees. It caught the moonlight so sharply it looked like a floating mirror, reflecting everything around it. Branches, sky, the moon's faint glow. My heart skipped a beat as I stopped dead in my tracks. This wasn't moving like any animal I'd ever seen. No wings, no legs, just sliding slowly and smoothly, as if gliding on an invisible current. I blinked, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. For about 20 seconds, it hovered there, drifting between the trees before disappearing into the shadows. I thought it might be a piece of trash, maybe a shiny tarp or a loose sign, but nothing moved or flapped in the wind. It remained completely silent and steady, almost like a living thing, yet cautious. I reached for my phone, but when I looked back, it was gone. No trace remained. I called out softly, but the woods swallowed my voice. Not wanting to follow it, I headed back to the station, feeling uneasy but trying to convince myself I was just tired and seeing things. The rest of the night passed without incident. I locked up, checked the gates, and turned off the lights. Just as I was about to leave, headlights cut through the trees at the far end of the parking lot. A black SUV rolled up slowly, stopping right near the ranger station. The windows were darkly tinted. A black SUV pulled up, engine eerily silent for its size. No license plate. The driver's door opened and a man stepped out. Crisp black suit, white shirt, tie perfectly straight. He looked clean-shaven, but something felt off about him, as if he didn't quite belong. Walking directly to me, he stopped and scanned the station before meeting my eyes. "You volunteer here?" His voice was calm but low. I nodded, trying to sound casual. "Just finishing up for the night." He pulled out a badge, a plain metal rectangle with unfamiliar letters. No official seals or emblems. "I'm with a special agency," he said. "We're taking over operations in this area, effective immediately. You're to file your reports elsewhere." "Reports? What reports?" He tapped a folder under his arm, asking about unusual encounters, observations, or incidents. I swallowed. "I haven't had anything like that." He nodded, as if expecting my response. "Good. Then there should be no problem." The interaction felt rehearsed, like a scene from a movie. Before I could ask questions, he glanced back at the SUV and added, "Stay clear of the old oak grove at night. No more volunteers allowed past closing hours." He returned to his vehicle and disappeared down the road, leaving me standing alone under the cold moonlight. The next day, everything had changed. The park office was stripped bare. No paperwork, no files. Rangers acted normal, but new signs blocked the old oak grove. Restricted area, no entry after dark. I kept the mirrored object and this encounter to myself. Who would believe me? Yet questions lingered about what they were hiding in those trees, what reports they wanted, and why. It was late spring, and the night shifts on the highway crew near Cedar Creek had become routine. Our team of 4, me, Jane, Marcus, and Foreman Steve, had been rotating shifts for weeks. The bright floodlights turned our worksite into an artificial day, cutting through the chilly night. Jackhammers usually filled the silence, making the work feel monotonous. But that night was different. Something felt off from the start. High above us, a shadow moved swiftly across the lights, unlike any bird or plane I'd ever seen. It was disc-shaped and completely silent. "Jay," our group's skeptic, stopped mid-sentence when I pointed it out. We watched it drift across the sky before it vanished behind the distant tree line. We joked about it being some unknown drone, but deep down, we knew something was unusual. Around 2 a.m., the air grew colder and clouds thickened. While stacking cones near the road's edge, I saw headlights pierce through the fog. A black rental pickup rolled up slowly, stopping near our equipment truck. Steve approached, squinting through the mist. A man emerged, dressed in an oddly perfect black suit. The fabric looked strangely stiff and matte, almost unreal. His shoes made no sound on the gravel as he walked. Without a greeting, he pulled out a small handheld scanner and began waving it over our helmets. It beeped quietly a few times while scanning each of us. "Your shift's moved," he said in a flat, emotionless voice. Even now, nights later, I find myself gazing toward the oak grove, half expecting to see that strange silver shape drifting silently through the branches. But it never appears, and I'm left wondering if what we saw was real at all. Steve frowned, his tone almost mechanical. "Pack up," he said. The unfamiliar man folded away his scanner and looked around as if expecting someone. Suddenly, he pulled a folded sheet of paper from his pocket. "Orders come down. Effective immediately." Steve took the paper and unfolded it. From the dim light, I could barely make out the words. At the top clearly said Cedar Creek Project, stamped confidential in big red letters. The rest was difficult to read, mentioning a temporary halt and reassignment to an unknown location. I asked, "Who sent you?" The guy stared at me for a long second, his look suggesting I wasn't supposed to be there. You won't get more details. You'll receive new instructions, he said curtly. He turned and walked back to the truck, which had its engine running before he even sat down. The headlights blinked once, and the vehicle disappeared into the fog as quickly as it had appeared. We stood in silence. Steve crushed the paper in his hand. Jay broke the quiet. That's the weirdest thing I've seen on any shift. Marcus nodded, asking, "You sure this wasn't some kind of prank?" I wasn't convinced. The guy moved oddly, like he didn't quite belong. His eyes were too cold, and that scanner was unlike any equipment I'd seen on a job site. We started packing up, but something felt off. While loading tools, I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see those lights or that shadow again. The night remained quiet, and when we left, the road behind us was empty as if nothing had happened. The next day, no one mentioned the shift change. Steve called the dispatcher, who claimed the schedule hadn't been updated and the project was still on. We tried returning that night, but the work site gate was locked. New official signs had appeared, warning about restricted access for safety reasons. The entire area felt sealed off, with no explanation. Weeks later, I ran into a former co-worker at the county office. When I asked about Cedar Creek, he hesitated before saying, "Some people notice strange lights out there, but nothing official. The whole thing's hush-hush now." That's all I learned. I still don't know what the shadow was or who that suited guy worked for, but I know our shift ended that night, whether the paper said so or not. I was out in the forest that morning, doing my usual state forestry work near Flagstaff, Arizona. My name is Carl Jensen, and my job involves monitoring tree health, checking for diseases, and setting up environmental sensors. The section I was working in that day was a quiet area of ponderosa pines, closed off due to wildfire risks. It was early morning, cool and clear, with a light breeze rustling the pine needles overhead. As I hiked to check on some sensors I'd installed weeks earlier, something strange happened. Around 9 a.m., I heard an unusual, low, vibrating hum. It was deeper and steadier than any machine noise I'd encountered before, like a distant engine idling. When I stopped and looked around, the sound seemed to be coming from just beyond a cluster of trees, maybe 50 yards away. Suddenly, a smooth, dark shape slipped silently between the tree trunks. I can't really call it a shape because it had no clear form, just a black mass, almost reflective in the patches of sunlight filtering through the forest canopy. It moved with an unnatural, fluid grace, as if gliding rather than walking. Just as quickly as it appeared, it disappeared behind a thick stand of pines. The forest felt different. The usual birds, sounds, and wind seemed muted, like everything was holding its breath. Part of me wanted to follow the shape, but something held me back. I shook off the feeling and continued to the sensors, completing my morning routine. By lunchtime, I was at the ranger station eating a sandwich and drinking coffee. That's when a strange man walked in. He looked completely out of place, clean-shaven, with short black hair slicked back, wearing a plain black uniform with no patches, logos, or name tag. I was at the forestry office, getting ready for another day of field work, when something unusual happened. A man dressed in an outfit more suited to government agents sat down at my table without invitation. His sudden presence was jarring, but strangely no one else seemed to notice. He studied my equipment spread out before me, GPS, weather meter, and various measuring tools. Then he asked with an unsettling directness about instrument calibration and accuracy. When I confirmed everything seemed fine, he cryptically mentioned that deviations could lead to unintended consequences, be fined or abruptly leaving. After he vanished, the afternoon took on a surreal quality. My GPS started showing bizarre position jumps, as if I'd teleported short distances. The weather meter behaved erratically, and that deep, persistent hum returned, barely audible beyond the tree line. I caught glimpses of a dark shape on a rock, which disappeared the moment I looked directly at it. I said nothing to my colleagues about the strange encounter or the mysterious figure. Something felt off, but I couldn't explain what. Since that day, I've noticed odd lights flickering between the pine trees at night and that low hum recurring even when no equipment is running. Was the man warning me about something? Checking on something I wasn't meant to see? One thing became clear. This forest harbors secrets far beyond its seemingly ordinary appearance. The morning was still fragile, the sky just beginning to lighten when I saw it. A light streak cutting across the heavens with impossible speed and precision. I was unlocking the back door of the wildlife rehabilitation clinic in rural Vermont, the air heavy with moisture from the previous night's rain, and everything around me seemed suspended in a half-awake state. A streak of light cut across the morning sky, so bright it was almost blinding. Clean and sharp like a glowing ruler had been dragged overhead, no tail, no blinking lights, no sound, just a line that seemed to slice through the horizon as if it didn't belong. I was still groggy when I arrived at the clinic, shaking off the strange vision. Something about it lingered in my mind as I went inside. The usual morning routine of checking on nocturnal animals, owls, bats, and raccoons, felt different today. Walking into the cage room, I immediately sensed something was wrong. Every single cage door stood wide open. This made no sense. I'm always careful about securing the pint O's doors before leaving at night, and the animals certainly couldn't have opened them themselves. The room was eerily silent. No rustling, no barking, no fluttering. The animals remained in their places, huddled quietly inside their cages. No signs of damage or struggle, just open doors, all unlocked. Later that morning, I checked the security cameras, hoping for an explanation, maybe a clever raccoon or an accidentally jarred door, but the footage showed nothing unusual, no movement near the cage room at all. I tried calling my colleagues, but it was too early. Not wanting to cause unnecessary alarm, I simply locked everything back up and continued my day. Yet an unsettling feeling persisted, the sensation of being watched. That evening, while locking up, I spotted him. A man in a black suit that looked straight out of the 1950s. His jacket was tight, tie perfectly knotted, shoes impossibly shiny for our small rural town. He stood just outside the clinic's front door. Without a word, he held out a key ring. A small white tag was attached, neatly printed with "Do Not Use." I stared, completely bewildered. His face remained expressionless, revealing nothing about his identity or purpose. When I asked who he was, he simply shook his head and walked away, disappearing into the gathering dusk, leaving me standing there with the mysterious keys in hand. My name is Lena Ortiz, and I chase storms with my camera. Lightning has been my obsession for years. There's something about that raw energy cutting through the sky that pulls me in. One humid evening, I was out on the edge of town, set up near a dirt road where power line pylons stretch across an open field. The air felt different that night, thick and silent. No crickets, no wind rustling the grass, just an unnatural quiet. I was watching the clouds darken, camera ready, waiting for a good strike. When a bolt suddenly lit up the sky, sharp and close, I snapped a photo. As I lowered the camera to check the shot, something caught my eye. Between two pylons, a dark shape flickered, almost like a silhouette, perfectly round, shifting like a shadow slipping between metal towers. I blinked, trying to rationalize what I'd seen. Maybe a trick of light, a bird, or a drone. But when I zoomed in on my camera screen, there it was, a round shape hovering near the power lines. The lightning had illuminated it, and it looked solid, not a reflection or lens flare. My heart skipped a beat, though I tried to convince myself it was just a weather balloon or camera artifact. Over the next couple of days, I kept returning to that photo. 2 days later, I was at a downtown cafe editing images on my laptop. Now, something else haunts me. My hand holds a key ring with a "Do Not Use" label glaring under the streetlight. I don't know what to do with them. The next morning, everything at the clinic seemed normal. No open cages, no missing animals. But sometimes, when dawn's light hits just right, I swear I see something moving outside. A shadow. A figure in a black suit watching from the edge of the trees. The key ring sits untouched on my kitchen table. A silent reminder of that night. I was sitting alone in a quiet corner of the cafe when he appeared. A man in a plain black suit, no tie, walked directly to my table and sat down without a word. His sudden presence startled me. "I see you've been photographing the storm near the pylons," he said, his voice calm but with an unsettling intensity. I nodded, uncertain whether this was a joke or if he was a reporter. Before I could respond, he grabbed my laptop and pulled up the photo with the dark disk. Surprisingly, he printed a black and white copy on the cafe's printer, a small portable device I hadn't even noticed in his briefcase. He slid the print across the table. "If you decide to share this image, consider framing it differently," he said, his eyes locked on mine. Confused, I watched him smile thinly and walk away as quickly as he'd arrived. Looking down at the print, I noticed something new. Subtle distortions around the disc-shaped silhouette, as if the air was bending or shimmering. Strange occurrences followed. My phone started dropping calls unexpectedly. The GPS would glitch, showing me in locations I'd never been. I began catching glimpses of men in black clothing, blending into crowds, always watching but never approaching. One stormy night, I returned to photograph lightning, hoping to understand what I'd seen. The wind whipped around me as I set up my camera. The flash of lightning revealed a brief glimpse of the disc near the pylons, but when I raised my camera, it vanished. The next morning, a small envelope appeared under my door. Inside was a grainy Polaroid taken from outside my apartment window. My reflection was visible, and behind me a faint shadow of a man in a suit. No note accompanied the photo. The feeling of being watched intensified. I stopped sharing my photographs, but the sense of something unknown lingered, just beyond my understanding. I'm Jack Mullins, lighthouse keeper on Cape Elmore for the past 5 years. It's not glamorous work, but I appreciate the quiet most days. That particular night, a fierce storm was raging, rain pelting the windows, and a wind howling like it wanted to tear the entire structure from its foundation. I was in the small kitchen area, doing what I always do during storms, watching waves crash beneath the lighthouse and logging wind speeds and visibility in my notebook. The radio crackled with static, broadcasting routine weather reports. Around midnight, at the storm's peak, I stepped out onto the balcony for a routine check. Something eyed my eye over the water, a faint, steady glow that didn't resemble any boat or buoy. This light moved with an unsettling intentionality, dipping beneath the waves and resurfacing in a way that felt deliberate. It wasn't random movement. The light pulsed softly in the dark, stormy sea, almost as if it was observing me just as carefully as I was watching it. No engine sounds, no visible silhouette, just this eerie, consistent glow. When I tried to radio in about the strange sight, only static answered. I watched this mysterious light move with the waves until it gradually faded as dawn approached and the storm began to subside. The next morning was serene, with clear skies and an ocean that looked deceptively peaceful after the night's turbulence. Weeks passed. The strange occurrence lingered in my mind, and though I continued photographing storms, hoping to capture something similar, nothing ever reappeared. Some things, I've learned, prefer to remain unseen, and some moments aren't meant to be shared exactly as they happen. Men in dark clothing seemed to watch me occasionally, though they never directly confronted me again about the photos. Glitches continued to occur, adding to the mystery of that night's inexplicable encounter. The night was quiet, save for the occasional crackle of static from the radio. I was at the Tonoba test range, a 38-year-old radar technician with 17 years of experience. It was October 1994, and the weather had just started to cool off. I was stationed at Nellis, but working a temporary assignment, mostly handling maintenance and diagnostics. That Tuesday, like most nights, was uneventful. We were expecting some classified testing near Groom, which wasn't unusual. I was meticulously cleaning my equipment and recording storm details in my logbook when, around noon, an unexpected knock interrupted my routine. Two men stood at the door, dressed in black suits, black ties, and shiny shoes that looked straight out of a 1950s detective film. They didn't introduce themselves. One held my logbook while the other stared silently. Methodically, they flipped through the pages, circling several dates in red ink, including the previous night's entry about a glowing orb. "You're advised to exercise discretion," one said quietly, his tone calm, but carrying an unmistakable weight. When I pressed for explanation, the other man simply added, "Some nights are better left unrecorded." As quickly as they arrived, they disappeared down the gravel path toward the main road, leaving me with a growing sense of unease. I examined the logbook again, noticing the red circles marked not just recent entries, but strange occurrences from weeks and months prior, things I'd previously dismissed. Since that day, odd things have been happening. The radio crackles with unexplained static. Brief, strange lights appear out at sea. Shadows flicker across walls in ways they shouldn't. But every time I consider discussing these incidents, I remember those men and their warning. Now, I continue writing in my logbook, carefully avoiding the marked nights. Some things, it seems, are indeed better left unrecorded. We were tracking specific aircraft through Tanopa's radar, with strict instructions to log and report without questioning the details. It was black project work, and you learn quickly not to dig too deep. That night, I was in the radar control van with Daniels, a newcomer from Edwards who was still getting familiar with our setup. Around 2 a.m., we were running a standard systems test, checking sweep ranges and looking for ghost returns. Midway through logging the final check, something caught my eye. A single return appeared on the screen's edge, right at the Groom Lake airspace boundary. No transponder, altitude 30,000 feet. Initially, I assumed it was a glitch, not uncommon when the scope overheats during long sweeps. But before I could reset, the blip moved with impossible speed. One moment it was of high altitude, the next it showed 0 ground level, smack in the middle of restricted airspace. Daniels leaned over, puzzled. I knew this wasn't a typical radar skip. The return had weight, a distinct signature, complete Doppler readings. This wasn't noise, a bird, or a cloud. It had structure. Then, just as quickly, it vanished, blinking off the scope like it never existed. We ran diagnostics. Everything checked out. Power was stable, no magnetic interference, systems clean. I pulled the signal log from the previous half hour and replayed it. The result was identical. One crisp, high-altitude hit, an immediate ground-level drop, then nothing. Daniel sat silently, staring at the blank screen. We reported it as a low-priority transient anomaly with no associated flight plan. The next morning, 2 civilian contractors arrived, suited up, with restricted credentials. An older man with salt and pepper hair, no name badge, asked me to walk him through what I'd seen. I detailed the incident, showing my printouts. His reaction was telling, no surprise, minimal questions. "That's consistent," he said, as if this were routine. Then he requested I delete the signal logs. When I explained I couldn't without proper authorization, he produced a pre-signed Department of Defense form with a red header. I knew better than to say anything after what happened. The logs were deleted, and later that week the radar van went offline for calibration. When it returned, the memory storage had been swapped, and all signal archives from that night vanished. 3 nights later, I was walking between the van and the comms building around 300. The cold hung in the air, maybe low 40s, with a stands, aligned so deep it buzzed in my ears. No wind, no bugs, just pure stillness. Scanning past the perimeter fence toward the south end of the range where Groom Lake airspace begins, I spotted a light. Bright white, hovering maybe half a mile off the ground. No blinking, no movement, just suspended there. This wasn't a plane. We had flight bands in place during that window. I stood frozen for about 20 seconds before it started rising slowly, vertically. No sound. Then it simply disappeared. Not faded, not flew away, just gone. The next morning, Daniels handed me a sealed envelope. No name, just my clearance level. Inside, a short memo stated my Tonopah assignment had ended early, effective immediately. I was being rotated back to Nellis. No explanation provided. I packed up that afternoon. Daniels was nowhere to be seen after that. I never learned if he stayed or was moved too. Years later, after retiring, I requested my service records out of curiosity. The Tonopah assignment was listed, but the radar logs for that week were missing. A complete blackout. I still remember how that blip dropped. 30,000 feet to 0 in less than a second. No arc, no trail, just there, then not. I apologize, but you haven't provided the full text that you want me to rewrite. Could you share the complete paragraph or script that you'd like me to restructure?